Hey folks, we are about to watch an episode with Monsignor Stuart Swetland on Catholic just war theory. It's a great episode, but we recorded this episode before Israel and the United States bombed Iran. And so we have an ongoing conflict now. I encourage you, while you're watching this episode and hearing the principles set forth by the tradition of the church on just war theory, about whether our current situation passes that test. Personally, I don't think it does. I don't think it sounds like we had the proper justification according to the standards that we're going to go through. But that's for you to decide. So please just let that float around the back of your mind as you listen to Monsignor lay out the tradition. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope it helps you think about current events all the more clearly with the tradition of the Catholic Church at the forefront of your mind. Thanks.
On just war theory, you have to take a step back and say first, how did it develop and why did it develop?
Yes.
The best minds, Ambrose and Augustine in the West, Basil the Great, they came up with the solution, which I think is the correct solution. Christians have the responsibility to defend the innocent. Just like the state, and the Catechism of the Catholic Church is very clear on this. Those entrusted with the public good don't just have, you can defend the innocent. You have the duty to defend the innocents entrusted to your care. You can never intend to kill the innocent, either conditionally or actually. One of the subs I served on had 16 MIRV missiles, each with a bomb 10 to 15 times bigger than the bombs that were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So theoretical, our one sub could blow up 160 cities. Well, that's the doomsday machine.
Oh my gosh.
I realized I could never pull the trigger.
A question I had down the list of questions, Monsignor, is we don't declare war ever. I don't think we've declared war since the Second World War.
Current administration is saying their right authority, which comes from Congress in our constitutional system,
I know. Yeah.
is because of the authorization of the use of military force, that's AUMF, we call those, from post 9/11. It's been misused, in my opinion, by many administrations. I think Congress should get involved and confirm the use of deadly force. That's our constitutional system. That's Congress' job. I think they're cowardly not to.
Monsignor Stuart Swetland, it's a pleasure to see you again and be with you. So thanks for being here.
Honored to be here. Thank you, Conor.
So I'm going to ask you just to explain to our audience who you are, what your background is, and eventually, just so the audience knows, we're going to get to start talking about the just war theory, and we're going to talk about the Hiroshima bomb and many other cool things. Not that that's a cool thing, but we're going to talk about interesting subjects. But your biography is incredible, so kind of just give us an overview of the man you are.
Well, first and most importantly, I'm a Catholic Christian who God has called to be a priest, and that's my identity. I'm the son of devout Christian parents, Stuart and Ernestine Swetland. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Grew up in Pennsylvania my whole life, though we moved to the Poconos when I was young. My mom and dad brought me up to be a devout Christian, but I lost my faith during my late teen and early 20s, mainly due to the issues we're going to talk about today. It was right after Vietnam, and I felt God was calling me to be in the military. I was fortunate enough to be appointed to the United States Naval Academy. So in 1977, I left Pennsylvania, went to Annapolis, Maryland, took my oath of office, became a midshipman, and studying at the academy. I like sciences, so I was a physics major. My mom had been a math teacher, so I was brought up to know the math, and of course got excited about the laboratory, and that led me to physics. And there were many Christians who did not want people to be in the military. I attended a church in Annapolis at the time that turned out to be a pacifist church. They didn't talk to me because I was in uniform. And when I realized with the same Bible and the same background, because it was in the Lutheran tradition, this church had come to the conclusion that you could not be moral, you could not be ethical, you couldn't be a Christian and be in the military. And I said to myself, well, my home church actually gave, my brother went in the Air Force about the time I went into the Navy, and they did a little special blessing service for us before we departed to our stations. And the pastor talked about what a good thing it was that we were serving the city of man while serving the city of God.
Wow.
Very Lutheran, very Augustinian approach to the question. But when I got to Annapolis, the same Christian church in the same denomination. At the time, I didn't know about the nuances of Protestant denominations. But to make a long story short, they didn't want me there. And so I said, well, if the Christian church can't answer even that question and give me a straightforward answer, and I feel called to do this, then maybe Christianity isn't true. And of course, I was 18 and 19, and that's a time when you can be foolish, which I was. And I quit praying. I quit going to church. But the haunting question of two things: did God exist? And the physics that I was studying made it clear to me there was a creator behind all this. The subatomic world, the astrophysics, it couldn't just be an accident. And I believe that to this day. But also the haunting question of there's got to be an answer to the question about the use of deadly force. It seems to me there are real times when deadly force has to be used to defend real innocents from actual aggression. Well, interestingly, even though I was a physics major, the Naval Academy, in light of the My Lai massacre trials, realized that they needed to train enlisted people better on the question of lawful and unlawful orders. And they tried a kind of a beta program with some midshipmen who were decent in their academics to teach enlisted the difference between a lawful order and an unlawful order, between a just war and an unjust war. And I was tagged to do that my senior year. So I spent time, and they threw a bunch of books at us and a bunch of history, and it was all, I didn't know at the time, it was all rooted in Catholic sources. So I began studying that information even before I graduated from the academy. But I was lucky enough, as I finished up my time at the academy, to be asked to be a Rhodes Scholar. I won a Rhodes Scholarship, which meant I got to go to Oxford. And the Navy didn't want me to continue to do sciences while I was in Oxford. They said, we'll send you to MIT to do that. If we want you to do that. While in Oxford, when in Rome, do as the Romans. They asked me to do liberal arts. So I did politics, philosophy, and economics at Oxford and got a BA, MA from Oxford University. And it was there that I started seriously studying the just war tradition. And that led me to start taking seriously the claims of the Catholic Church. Interesting, my atheistic professors were pushing me to ask the right questions about everything. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, I had dear, close friends in school with me at graduate school at Oxford who were Catholic. Most prominent among them, my godfather, Robbie George, who lived his faith. That's one of the best ways to evangelize. Just live your faith to the full.
Who's one of the greatest scholars in the world right now, and one of the predominant voices of the new natural law theory, among many other things. Yes. He's gone around the world writing constitutions for developing countries and many more things.
And Robbie was shocked that he was influencing me, but he was. Mm-hmm. Another one, Dr. Dermot Quinn, who teaches at Seton Hall now, from Northern Ireland, a devout Catholic. His witness, Vesna Drapa, who was a Rhodes Scholar from Australia. These individuals just lived their faith, and they had joy, they had peace. And I was looking for joy and peace, but they also had the answers to the questions I was asking. If they didn't have them themselves, they led me to the source. Go look at this, go look at that, read this, look at that. And that made me take seriously the claims of the Catholic Church, which is foundationally, the Catholic Church claims to be the church founded by Christ, that has everything Christ intended the church to have for our sanctification and salvation. That's the key question when you're a non-Catholic coming to the church. Do you believe the Catholic Church is what she says she is? Mm. And I came to realize I did believe that. And so I became Catholic before I left Oxford, being received in the church in the Thomas More Chapel there at the Newman Center at Oxford University by Father Rod Strange. Went back to the military thinking I'd be a naval officer, but after serving my initial commitment to the Navy, and praying, I started to feel this strange call to serve in a different way. So I entered the seminary in 1987, was ordained a priest in 91, a deacon in 90, a priest in 91, for the Diocese of Peoria, Illinois. I didn't have a Catholic home in the States, so that's where I ended up. And it turns out God led me there for many reasons, I think, but particularly because there were a lot of college ministries there. As a college convert myself, I did most of my priesthood in Newman Centers at secular universities, Bradley University, University of Illinois. But then my bishop asked me to continue the work I was doing at Catholic universities. So I went back to my alma mater, Mount St. Mary's, where I went to seminary. I was a professor there. And then they asked me to become a vice president and work on Catholic identity issues for the college. And from there, course, the next step is to be president somewhere. So currently I'm president of Donnelly College in Kansas City, Kansas, and pastor of Our Lady in St. Rose Catholic Church in Kansas City, Kansas.
Well, you've done EWTN work. You've done incredible scholarship on so many subjects. You've brought so many people into the faith. It's just remarkable. But how did you become a Monsignor? Because that was pretty early on.
It was. In between my time at Bradley and the University of Illinois, I was sent away to get my doctorate in so that I could teach at the University of Illinois. And the man that I was replacing at the University of Illinois as chaplain, Monsignor Ed Duncan, had done a phenomenal job of being a Newman minister. He really was the model for some of the really strong Newman ministries you see throughout the country. And he was there for 53 years.
Wow.
When I replaced him, first thing he said to me, when I came here, Roosevelt was president. Now, I was being a little tongue-in-cheek in my own mind. I wanted to say, was that Teddy or Franklin? But I didn't say that out of honoring him. But this man was such a great Newman chaplain that he was very close to the football team. He was a chaplain for years and years. So at his 50th anniversary of priest, which I got to attend when I was in school, Dick Butkus was the keynote.
Really?
And when Butkus was talking about the influence of who he called him father then, he broke down crying. I said to the bishop, you're sending me to replace the man that makes Dick Butkus cry. Uh-huh. So I said, that's a tough task. But I got assigned to that job as a young priest. And of course, there had been a Monsignor in the position for years. So in the Jubilee year 2000, I was nominated to become a Monsignor and made so by St. John Paul II,
wow.
Even though I was only 9 years in the priesthood. Yeah. But it was mainly because we call it a battlefield promotion in the military. I was in a Monsignor's role, and
wow.
So it was. I think they thought they made a mistake because they changed the rules soon after that. You have to be older now to get.
So that was your fault. That was your fault.
Yeah, my fault. Yeah.
So you mentioned your doctorate, and we might loop back around to this, but tell us what you did your doctorate in, because at breakfast, it blew my mind, and we had quite a conversation on it.
Right. Well, because I'm a convert to the faith, but also because I have the background in politics, philosophy, and economics, I was naturally drawn toward the social teaching of the church. But I also recognized in the 90s, and my bishop, pushed me in this direction, the crisis that was happening in families, with the divorce rate and so many even Catholic families falling apart. So I did go to the John Paul II Institute for the Study of Family and Marriage. So my degrees are from the Lateran University in Rome, though I did most of my work here in the United States at Catholic University of America. That time they were housed at the Dominican House of Studies, across the street from the Catholic U. But it seemed to me one of the pressures on families was the social question that has to do with economics, that has to do with work. So I wanted to study the American neoconservative movement, who was working in that area, people like Michael Novak and George Weigel and Richard John Neuhaus, and look at their social teaching in light of the Catholic social tradition, especially that of John Paul II, since I was at the Institute bearing his name. And so that's where I focused on my doctoral thesis, particularly on Michael Novak.
So you want to turn to just war theory?
Sure.
So I want to go through, kind of get a crash course in it. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people might not even recognize the term just war theory, but but everyone has asked, was the Hiroshima bomb, the atomic bomb, was it okay? Was it morally just? Was it justified? Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping you can kind of share your thoughts on that, but then we'll kind of go into how a Catholic is supposed to think about it, because it's not just yes or no. There's a formula. Yeah. The church has a formula for us to kind of go through a very difficult topic like that, and that'll take us into many other subjects. But was the bomb justified or not?
Right. Well, if you don't mind, I want to step back.
Please do.
By the way, you can ask me anything. I used to joke when I played basketball, and I did at Oxford and other places. I used to say, "Have jump shot, we'll travel." So you can okay. you can ask me anything about the faith, and I'll try to do the best I can.
Hey guys, real quick, we noticed 80% of you that watch the episodes are not subscribed. So please do me the favor and subscribe and hit the bell for notification. That helps you get the content, but it also helps this amazing stuff get spread to other people just like you. Thanks for your help. Now let's dive back in.
But on just war theory, you have to take a step back and say first, how did it develop and why did it develop?
Yes.
The first 3 centuries of Christianity, for all practical purposes, Christians could not be in the military. And many people, if you read history books, especially secular history books, they'll say that's because Jesus taught pacifism, turn the other cheek, love your enemy, etc. And they'll say that it's incompatible with Christianity. And in the fourth century, when Christianity was decriminalized under Constantine, then it was the church kind of copped out and allowed people to be in the military. That reading is hokum. It is not what Jesus taught, if taken holistically. And it's not the reason that Christians couldn't, on a whole, be in the military. Now, there were exceptions. We get great exceptions like St. Sebastian.
Yeah.
And when Christianity was tolerated at times, Christians were in the military. But often it cost them their lives, as it did with St. Sebastian.
With him, yes.
So, but the reason that Christians couldn't be in the military was theological. The military had to take an oath of allegiance to the emperor as God. And that violated the first commandment. No Christian could take that oath in good conscience because we have one God, the triune God, that has been revealed to us by Jesus the Christ, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That one God and one God alone would violate the first commandment to take that oath claim of the emperor's claim to divinity. So it was only when Christianity was decriminalized and that oath was no longer required that Christians could consider the military as a vocation. And I want to emphasize throughout our discussions that each and every human has a vocation, a calling. It's not just priests and religious that do. Every person has. And so if people are called into the military, if people are to serve in the military, it means they're called to serve into the military for whatever reason, be their gifts, talents, abilities, or histories. So Christians in the 4th century had to grapple with this question. And quite frankly, like many things in the church, you start grappling with the question when it's forced upon you. And so, just the best minds, Ambrose and Augustine in the West, Basil the Great and his contemporaries, the Gregories and others, had to grapple with this question, Athanasius before them, as they entered into the 4th century, where now Christianity was at least decriminalized, eventually became the official religion of the empire. To make a long story short, they came up with the solution, which I think is the correct solution, that when there is real aggression against actual innocent human beings, that Christians have the responsibility to defend the innocent from that aggression. While we ourselves may turn the other cheek to some injustice that's happened to us, it's wrong to go. It'd be wrong for me to turn your cheek and say, "Okay, hit him again," right? When I have the responsibility to defend. Now, as a priest, I'm in a different situation now, but as a military man, I had the duty to defend. Just like a father has the duty to defend his family, just like the state and the Catechism of the Catholic Church is very clear on this. Those entrusted with the public good don't just have, you can defend the innocent. You have the duty to defend the innocents entrusted to your care. To fail to do that is a failure in justice. And that's why things like the draft, when it's necessary, is not an imposition on the conscience of people. One has a responsibility to respond to it, assuming the war that you're being drafted into or the military you're being drafted into is being used justly. So the just war theory is a way to try to explicate what just defense looks like. So it's broken down into parts through space and time.
Well, you said just defense.
Yes.
Which gets into the question, which we'll get to later, of like preemptive war and whatnot.
Right.
But everything you've said is in the context of defense.
It is, because the just cause, now we basically recognize the only just cause is defense of self or others. There was times in the Middle Ages where they also considered just cause the restoration of that which was taken. So if a territory was taken, could we restore that? And the righting of wrongs. Some of the language used around the Crusades, for example, was to deal with rightings of wrongs, though some of the language was also recovering that which was lost, obviously defending the rights of Christians in the Holy Land as well. But through space and time and the modern incarnations, if you will, of the just war theory, we basically boiled it down just to just defense of
Okay.
self or others. Because throughout, that's what you're doing. You're defending innocence from aggression. You're defending those who cannot defend themselves for whatever reason from actual harm, even the threat of death, from those who would aggress against them. And of course, in the 4th century, that meant the people who spoke Baba, we call them barbarians, the people coming from the north who were invading the remnant of the Roman Empire. Could you defend? And Augustine Ambrose and Augustine and people like them in the west, Basil in the east, both said, yes, not only can you, you must defend the innocent from these aggressions.
Yes.
And so beginning with that, you get a development through space and time of the just war tradition. Now, as a former military officer, I'll tell you that the Catholic intellectual tradition that really spawned this set of teachings, it's now been brought over into the secular world and codified through the UN Charter, for example, through the Geneva Conventions, through the various treaties and conventions on war and the treatment of prisoners, for example, the treatment of the wounded, Geneva Conventions. Nuremberg trials gave us, as you know as a lawyer, the Nuremberg trials gave us real jurisprudence that have entered this into international law. So this isn't just something that is for Catholics. It's for everybody in the world, recognizes that there are moral truths. Boy, that's a radical thing to say in a post-secular, postmodern world that has rejected truth. But in the military, the Nuremberg trial is a good example of this. We say there are certain truths that are embodied and have to be defended, and moral truths, and some of those are the just war tradition.
Outstanding. Okay, so go back to the early history kind of helped shape this.
Yes.
Now it kind of begins to get codified in the early tradition, and we come up essentially with what I call the formula, right? So we do get to that point where there are these elements. You want to take us through that?
Sure. The first, of course, is the just cause. Everything else depends really that you have a just cause. You have real defense. So, I think World War II is the clearest example of a just defense. You had real aggressions from a hideous philosophy and, real aggression from the fascist powers, from Germany, obviously, from Japan, and then for a while, at least Italy, until it switched sides and changed its approach. But the fascist powers were really aggressing. Italy against Ethiopia, Japan against the entirety of the what we would call the Far East, and obviously Germany against its neighbors. So you had real aggression and you had real destruction of the innocent. So just cause is defending the innocents. Then it has to be last resort. You don't start with the military response. It is after every reasonable alternative has been tried to to stop or impede the aggression and defend innocents. You have to have the right intention. You could even have a just cause and it be last resort, but you'd be doing it for the wrong reasons. Some of the motives for America in certain conflicts have been questioned. I'm not saying they were wrong, but people wonder sometimes some of the things we do in the Middle East, is it about real defense or is it about something like oil or other economic reasons? So it has to be just cause, last resort, right intention, and it has to be declared by legitimate authority. Not just anybody can declare war or go to war. We don't have private wars, or shouldn't. We call people going to private wars in the Navy, that what I was in, we call them pirates. And there's international rules against piracy, even though you see piracy is alive and well, sadly, in the South China Sea, off Somalia and parts of Africa. So we're right back to what our founding fathers had to deal with the Barbary Coast pirates. So there is still piracy, but it has to be, if it's a legitimate war, declared by right authority. Now, right now in the United States, we're dealing with this question because the ongoing conflict that it looks like we're going to have with Venezuela, that we're having a little bit with some of the Venezuela drug boats, that the current administration is saying their right authority, which comes from Congress and our constitutional system, is because of the authorization of the use of military force. That's AUMF, we call those, resolution from post 9/11. That was broadly written, and I've criticized that in other places, that it was too broadly written, and it's been misused, in my opinion, by many administrations. For example, Obama used it in its conflict with Libya, and I thought it was misused then. I think it's been misused several times. I think Congress should get involved and confirm the use of deadly force. That's our constitutional system. That's Congress' job. I think they're cowardly not to. But I think it's a huge stretch to use the anti-terrorist authorization for military force post 9/11 to talk about Venezuela drug boats.
Is it sort of like they can use the Patriot Act to just do anything they want to, just spy on anybody for any reason? Yeah. And now it's like a question I had down the list of questions, Monsignor, is we don't declare war ever. Like I don't think we've declared war since the Second World War.
Yeah.
Well, is that correct?
Well, it formally declared war. I would argue that the authorization of use of military force after 9/11 did allow us to go into Afghanistan.
Okay.
I criticize its use even to go into Iraq. I think it was a stretch there. I published on that I was against that intervention. Lost a lot of military friends because I was against that war.
I bet, yeah. But aren't you proving to be right? I mean, hasn't the tide turned a little bit and people are saying, that was a problem?
I do think my editorials before that war that said, don't do this, read well in 2025. I don't want to say I told you so because that doesn't help.
I'll say it. He told you so.
But here I can't take any intellectual credit because I was just following the lead of John Paul II, who was adamant that this was a mistake. Even sent a personal envoy, Cardinal Pio Laghi, who had been our nuncio, to the Bush family, he knew the Bush family, kind of begging that they don't do that. But that's unfortunately 2020 hindsight.
Well, just to dig in a little bit, since you've researched that, was that just a bad intelligence or was there bad intention?
Well, here I do think there was clouded thinking. Obviously, Saddam Hussein was a problem. But we have to remember, back when I was in the military, he was our ally. He was holding the front against Iran in the 80s, and we were supplying him, and we were propping him up. But even back then, we knew him to be more, quite frankly, more like the head of a powerful family than someone who was really caring about his whole people. I was more interested in aggrandizing and enriching his clan, his group inside of Iraq, which was, quite frankly, a difficult situation even then. Because he was a strong man, a dictator, he could sort of hold the country together. But it was such, divergent pieces that were never really one country. This is one of the problems of post-colonialism, is a lot of the nations that were created post-colonialism aren't really, rational creations. They're cobbled together because it was in the colonial powers. That I can't give much details, but the actual drawing of the borders of Iraq and Kuwait and some of those countries was done over the chessboard by people in the British and French settings as they were moving out of the Middle East. So the artificiality of this was one of the problems. But the Saddam was obviously a problem, but the distraction that I think it became, to some in the Bush administration, it was just difficult because they saw that, President Bush's dad had been targeted by Saddam Hussein. That's got to cloud your thinking when you're making it. But they really did believe, and the advisors around President Bush really believed that they could create a modern multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy in the heart of the Middle East, and it would change everything. I thought at the time that was wishful thinking, and as we've seen, it has in fact not happened. Just the opposite happened. So there was multiple reasons not to go into Iraq in 2003. But
have we contributed to a more unstable region?
Well, it's been devastating to the Christians in the region, at least, and I would say yes.
Wow. Okay. Back to the bomb.
Yeah. Right. I didn't get through my whole list yet. So you go into a war also, you have to have probability of success.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm writing down the elements. I missed that one.
Yeah, probability of success. Because one of the reasons you want to do that, and I'll give two examples, then we did not go to war, though it might have been justified on all the other principles, but because we did not think there would be a probability of success. And what success means is you bring about a more just situation and you defend real innocence from actual aggression. But two times we didn't go to war that might have been justified otherwise. Hungary in 56, Czechoslovakia in 68. Both countries.
I'm showing my ignorance. I don't know anything about this.
Well, both of those had rebellions against the Soviet domination in the Eastern Bloc. Both had these, if you will, awakenings for human rights, for freedom. They had legitimate reasons to want to be free from Soviet domination. And so there was a revolution in 1956 in Hungary. We did not enter militarily to support that. It probably would have led to World War III, probably to nuclear war. And so the Eisenhower administration thought it was imprudent to do that because of the probability of success. It could well have led to total annihilation, mutual assured destruction, as was talked about at the time. Mm-hmm. And again in '68, when Czechoslovakia had their human rights spring, if you will, people like Václav Havel, led a revolution that we did not at the end militarily support. So you have to have a probability of success. God does not call you to do the useless.
Yeah.
The last but not least is proportionality.
Proportionality.
Yeah. The whole war has to be proportionate in the sense that the damage and death that's going to happen because of the war has to be proportionate to the just cause that you are defending. And that's so I think, for example, President Bush Sr. was and the allies, all the nations that joined with us were right in liberating Kuwait from the invasion from Saddam Hussein at that time. That was a legitimate defense of real innocence from an aggression. But you notice that they only went to as far as the just cause would allow them, which is liberating Kuwait. He could have continued on militarily and replaced Saddam Hussein at that time. Bush chose not to because it wasn't part of the just cause that they had gone to the UN, that they had told their allies they were fighting to liberate Kuwait from that. That seems to me to be a legitimate use of military force and proportionate.
All right, okay. I see how it's proportionate.
Yeah.
Back to the just cause issue. I think a lot of people look at this, and I do too, and say, wait a second, this is not defense of us. This is defense of somebody else on the other side of the planet, and are we really the police for the entire Earth?
Right. Well, we have made treaty obligations that says we're going to defend others, and others will defend us if we're attacked. So remember that allies went to war in Afghanistan with us because we had been attacked in 9/11. So it goes both ways. So we have these mutual treaties. Obviously, the most well-known is the NATO treaty,
yes.
where we have a mutual defense pact, where an invasion of one NATO country is an invasion of them all. From the treaty articles, Article 5, that we have this mutual defense. Now we have made other commitments like that with nations, just between us and the nations, but we also have groups like the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. That was some of the reasons that Australia and others were involved in Vietnam.
If we sign these big treaties like NATO, does that kind of take us one step closer to globalism? And are we better just being small little countries that take care of ourselves and stay away from everybody else?
Well, I know it's not the most popular, especially among people in the United States. But if you read people like Benedict XVI closely, he thought we needed more world government, not less, especially in the financial, to govern the financial world. And if you look at what happened in 2008, maybe he was right that we need more global regulation on the use of capital. But
that's hard for my brain to go there.
No, I understand because we'll probably talk about this, but Catholics always have to balance subsidiarity and solidarity.
Yes.
Yeah. Matter of fact, because I have a paper here that has that quotation. I was thinking about it. If I can find it real quick.
Yeah, take your time. No, do it.
Yeah.
I mean, because subsidiarity is one of the key principles of Catholic social doctrine. Yeah. And quite frankly, I went through one of I think it was what was Pope Francis's encyclical on the nickname was Tutti Frutti. I forget the real name. I forget. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do, but I don't know. I don't remember.
I forget the name of the actual. But I went through. What is it?
Fratelli Tutti.
Yeah, Fratelli Tutti.
Okay.
Yeah, and I went through that because it was a social encyclical. And Monsignor, I noticed something. The word solidarity was used like 40 times, and the word subsidiarity was used once, and it was a misapplication of the concept of subsidiarity. So I mean, like subsidiarity was not on his radar very much. He was not thinking very much about subsidiarity. So it is a little confusing for me when I think about Benedict, perhaps, saying things, doing things that kind of leans towards a more globalistic mindset. Because as a traditional Catholic, I'm kind of like, well, globalism bad, that mindset.
Yep. Well, in Caritatis in Veritate, paragraph 2, Benedict, that's 2009, so the crisis has just happened, the financial crisis. He says, we must be convinced that charity is the principle not only of micro relationships with friends, with family members, or with small groups, but also of macro relationships, social, economic, and political ones. So that sort of sets the tone. And then in paragraph 67, he says, in Charity and Truth, would be the English translation, this seems necessary in order to, talking about world government, this seems necessary in order to arrive at a political, juridical, and economic order which can increase and give direction to international cooperation for the development of all peoples in solidarity, to manage the global economy, to revive economics hit by crisis, to avoid any deterioration of the present crisis and the greater imbalances that would result, to bring about integral and timely disarmament, food security, and peace, to guarantee the protection of the environment and in regulating migration. For all this, there is an urgent need of a true world political authority, as John the 23rd indicated.
Wow.
So,
it's bringing back to memory, because I've taught Catholic social doctrine, and I have covered that encyclical in the line of social doctrine encyclicals, and I do remember now reading that thinking, who's this guy? Because I'm showing my ignorance, but that doesn't sound like what you would usually classify as a quote unquote a traditional Catholic. That sounds more like a globalist, environmentalist kind of, so help me square that a little bit. I mean, not that we're anti-world, not that we're anti-world peace, but it's a question of emphasis.
Right. I would say the popes in the, from John the 23rd on, have been, actually Pius XII too, have all been more pro-UN than the average American is. Even though we host the UN, we've never, it's always been a tense relationship, shall we say. And I mean, how many of the presidents have talked about withdrawing from the UN or threatened to do so? But I think because the Holy Father, has the world on their horizon.
Yeah,
they see the disorder. Like, for example, would it be helpful if we had a world government that could regulate better migration? We see how migration is a huge problem all over the world. We're seeing the number of refugees, the number of displaced persons, but we see the tremendous devastation and death involved with people fleeing. There's no regulation. There's piracy. There's exploitation. There's child sex trafficking. There's everything that's going on. So you can see where it would make sense. In 2009, when Benedict is writing that, he's looking back at his predecessors like John the 23rd and saying maybe they were right about empowering the UN to be more regulatory of the international currency market or the international trade. And obviously the church has always been we've got a very green church. We've always been very pro-environment because we have to defend and take care of God's creation. Yeah. We should hand on to the next generation a creation that's at least in as good a shape as the one we received. So given that, and full disclosure, for a brief time in my priesthood, I worked under Cardinal Ratzinger during the drafting of the Catechism. And these are consistent with most of his time, both as a theologian and as a bishop and as the head of the CDF. They've been more pro-world government. Now, we immediately cringe because we know Lord Acton was right. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And a world government would seem to tend towards that absolutism. So there'd have to be a lot of checks and balances in that.
Well, I don't want like a world government telling the United States how many immigrants they have to let in every year. You know what I mean? So I guess the devil's in the details.
Well, exactly.
I mean, I think like a sovereign nation, doesn't a sovereign nation get to decide whether it has any immigrants at all? Like it would think that that's what a country is.
Well, no, I would say from Catholic social teaching, no, because the universal destination of goods. No, I don't think any nation can say, That's it. Just us. You all stay out. I don't think any nation, maybe in a time of pandemic, you could do that for a temporary period while you're dealing with contagion. But because of the universal destination of goods, there have to be a just reason. I would say a serious reason, not just a just reason, a serious reason to deny someone entry who is either fleeing for their life or fleeing even for economic benefit. So that's why I think the prejudice is if there's a serious reason, economic, socially, or if you're really a refugee fleeing for your life or because of your belief system, like our first pilgrims were, that they have a right to find a better place.
All right, I can see it. Yeah. I can see it now. I do remember that from teaching Catholic social doctrine, the universal destinations of goods. I tend to forget that one sometimes.
Yeah. And I do point out, God did not draw borders, except with the one exception of Israel. He doesn't draw borders. So these are man-made things, not God-made things.
But you have to because of the universal destination of good, a nation would have to have good reason for doing something like drawing up the drawbridge and not letting people in. But take America's situation right now where, I mean, how do you judge the current situation? Say, wait a minute, we have immigrants flooding in. There's terrorists in there. There's drugs in there.
Now you have every right You have every right to regulate that, and it should be orderly and regulated. Paragraph 2241 of the Catechism.
Well, that makes a little bit easier to stomach.
Right. You know? It should be and you do have, if you have a serious reason to keep someone out, like they mean harm to your citizens, like they carrying contagious disease. Remember, Ellis Island used to screen for disease. You can deport someone. Like if you look at the 19th and 20th century, when we were taking huge numbers of immigrants and there wasn't any real quotas, people were deported if they committed serious crimes or refused to, integrate in the States. There was legitimate deportations. So all of that can happen. But here I'm going to get a little, I won't say theological, but I will say theological. Currently, I think America has to recognize that through abortion, we have killed millions of our people that God intended us to have. Immigration gives us a second chance.
It's replacing that number.
To be generous and to open our hearts and our nation partly in reparation, but also partly, I'll be honest with you, I live in Kansas. The immigrants we have in Kansas, documented and undocumented, we need them all. We probably need more to take care of the industries, to take care of the jobs that are going wanting, to build up the society. We'll shrink as a state if the undocumented are taken out in a significant way. Matter of fact, I told the politicians you'll have one less congressional seat so there's real reason why we should be generous. Now, it should be regulated. We shouldn't let people in that want to do us harm. We should want people who want to be integrated fully into the United States as citizens, as people who adhere to our Constitution and to our founding principles. That's all legitimate, but we should be generous because, quite frankly, we need the people.
All right, that's fascinating, and I believe that the stats show that the birth rate in America is so low that if
we're below replacement.
If we did not have immigration, we'd be shrinking.
Yeah, and that in itself is a problem. Don't get me right. Don't get me wrong. I mean, and obviously lots of Catholics are responding and being very generous, like you and your extended family are, to having and being open to children. But we aren't as a nation doing that. And Europe is worse off than we are. Places like traditionally Catholic places like Italy and France. Way below the replacement rate. So that's a whole nother question on us being generous and understanding the proper use of our sexual powers.
I think the what's happened recently, particularly right here in Charlotte, we're right outside of Charlotte, and my boys and I, over a lot of cigars very recently, have been discussing this. And it is like, well, here's the issue. The raids, the kind of like the Trump raids that are kind of coming in and rounding up the immigrants, kind of blocking off everybody, checking for green cards and deporting. Like, it's happening, right? And people are seeing, I hear people like talk about, they see the SWAT cars, kind of the SWAT vans, and they pop out and then the immigrants are running from the job sites or whatever. And it's kind of, I haven't seen it myself because I live out in the middle of nowhere. I have more cows than people, but it's kind of a scary sight. And so here's what I'm trying to say. Conservatives like me we have these strong narratives of kind of like round them up, get them out of here kind of idea. But then when it actually starts to happen and you hear about good people being separated from their families, it's kind of like, well, hang on here. How do we do this more charitably? How do we do this more justly? How do you do this more, anyway, and I think a lot of my conservative friends who would have extremely strong immigration policies and were attracted to the whole Trump rhetoric, when they're actually seeing these things happen physically in town, they're second guessing their narrative. And so that led to very interesting conversations about what do you actually do about this? I mean, we do have a problem. Immigrants are all over the place. They are illegal. It is a felony, but many of them are good family people that have no criminal track record other than the felony of getting here. What do you do about this? And so, but just this kind of empty, dispassionate language, this cowboy kind of idea of just round them up and get them out. It just as soon as you actually see it happen, it flies in the face of every Christian ethos that a country can have. Did that make sense at all?
No, it does, exactly. And here we're seeing a reaction to a disastrous policy.
Yeah.
The Biden administration, I think deliberately, I'm being cynical, but if it wasn't deliberate, it was a huge failure.
Gross negligence ends up looking deliberate.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the best way to put it. You're a good lawyer. You can tell. So they were negligent at all in enforcing the border and enforcing our laws. And so, huge numbers, and we have no idea what the real numbers are. And all kinds of bad things happen, including human trafficking and all kinds of things, because no one enforced the law. And so in reaction to that period, people want something done. And that's why I think some of the rhetoric and some of the actions of the current administration is trying to rectify that. But when I think about this, I'm old enough to remember when they imposed the 55-mile-per-hour speed limit around the country during the oil crises in the 70s. Well, one size fits few. All right, 55 may make sense in Washington, D.C. It doesn't make sense in Montana, right? But I don't know if you've ever lived in a place where they have a speed limit that's never enforced, and everybody goes, it says 35, but everybody goes 50.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they want to enforce it. Everyone said, wait, you didn't enforce this before, right? And, as you know from law, if it's not enforced, it's not a binding law.
That's right.
As a matter of fact, famously, if people cut across your property and you let them cut across your property long enough, you create public domain.
Yes, absolutely.
So silence gives consent, right? So that all of a sudden we start enforcing the law, all kinds of injustices can happen, given that we weren't enforcing the law before. So how do we deal with this? And
it's called adverse possession. It just came to me. Boom.
Thank you.
Adverse possession, right? Because they just take it because you didn't defend it ever, and so it becomes theirs. Yeah.
Right. So I think we have to recognize that we created this situation.
Yes.
The United States created it because we failed to enforce our law. We can't just all of a sudden start enforcing it or we're doing great harm to real people. So how do we rectify this? And I think some kind of process where the people who have been here for a long period of time can regularize their situation. I don't think we have to necessarily give them a path all to citizenship. Matter of fact, that may be one way to compromise, not do that. But they have a way to regularize what has been de facto a legal situation because we didn't enforce it for decades.
Yes.
And then do what the Trump administration has admirably done. They have stopped the flow of illegal immigrants for all practical purposes. So now we know the people who are coming are usually coming to do us real harm and that there are reasons to defend ourselves from those people.
Yeah, it's really good. I related this very issue, again, over those cigars with my adult sons, saying, listen, if a mom and dad have some kind of rule, right? Like you have to go to bed at 9 o'clock or something like that, and they never enforce it. And then all of a sudden, a year later, they decide one day you're up at 9:15, but you've been staying up until 10 o'clock every night for a year. And all of a sudden they come in and just throw the gauntlet down and you're grounded and, all this kind of stuff. That's just not fair. Yeah. It's just not fair. And that's what we've had as an unenforced law.
I can hear the kids saying, that's not fair.
Exactly. But it works on the macro level and the micro level. I mean, it's the same moral dilemma of you have an unenforced rule.
Right. And it was a conservative. You said you're a conservative. It was a conservative that in '87, Ronald Reagan gave an amnesty, partly because he saw this as the issue. Now, some say that incentivize others coming illegally, and that may be true. So obviously, we have to do this with some dexterity. But I think it behooves us. Well, I think America is much smaller than it was meant to be, partly because of what we've done to our unborn. And so many brothers and sisters are missing, by some counts, a third of a generation. Wow. Now, as an aside, since we have time to talk asides,
we got all the time we want.
Curtis Martin is the founder of Focus.
Yeah.
He has a very insightful way of looking. His missionary activity to the generation that suffered from abortion is phenomenal. He's on the college campuses. He's there bringing the gospel of Jesus Christ in sometimes very difficult settings and meeting with wonderful success. Many, many people coming to Christ. Many, many people coming into the fullness of the faith of the Catholic Church. But Curtis, once I heard him do this quite eloquently, he said, when in human history has there been a holocaust of the innocents? One of the first recorded time we have is when a baby named Moses was born. And there was a holocaust of innocence at that time. Yes. And Moses was miraculously saved from that holocaust. And of course, he became the instrument by which God gave us the first covenant. And he said, when the next time we have the time when Herod, in reaction to the threats to his power that a newborn king would mean, went after John the Baptist and Jesus in their infancy and wiped out many 2 years. We're going to celebrate that feast of the Holy Innocents during the octave of Christmas.
Yes.
And of course, that's because the Lord and Savior was born and his forerunner was born. And of course, you see Satan behind this, trying to destroy God's plans by destroying the instruments by which those plans come to be. Well, those holocausts were small little things compared to the holocaust of abortion. Wow. So what must this generation, what God is going to do in this generation that Satan's pulled out all the stops to kill it? I think there's something great that God has in store. That's why getting as many of these young men and women on fire for their faith, I think they're going to finally do the Great Commissioning. I think we have the possibility of going to all the world and effectively bringing the gospel of Jesus Christ to all the world. That's what I think this generation is meant to do, because we finally have the social means of communication and other things to do this. But Satan's pulling out all the stops to kill as many of them as he can to keep it from happening.
Absolutely the single greatest commentary on America abortion that I've ever heard in my entire life. That's it right there.
Yeah. Now, give credits to others where it's due.
That's incredible. All right. Back to the bomb. This is the great thing about podcasts. You just go forever. But back to the bomb. So we've talked about just cause, last resort, right intention, legal authority, legitimate authority, probability of success, and proportionality. So you don't by the way, on proportionality, another question I had baked in here somewhere, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Was that kind of a proto example of just war? He was saying, did it mean it wasn't a matter of go take the guy's eye out? It was saying don't take more than his eye out.
Right. It was a step towards reining in the natural passions that we have to, when someone injures my eye, I want to take their life. And if they, take my life, my clan wants to, wipe out all of them, so limiting it was a step along the way. So it is a step towards proportionality. Now, in the time of the New Covenant, Catholic Christians should read proportionality in the just war tradition, not in a utilitarian way. That's how, unfortunately, the way the secular world thinks about it. Some kind of cost-benefit analysis, utilitarian calculation. That's not what proportionality is for Christians. It's an application of the golden rule.
Yes.
What I understand, I use the example when I used to teach this at University of Illinois or at Mount St. Mary's, so both in a Catholic and secular state setting, that if Cuba invaded Florida, I would actually do this test with the students. I would map out a Cuban invasion of southern Florida, and I would give them a certain amount of firepower and how should they respond. And I put military targets in cities in Cuba and cities in Florida that were occupied. And inevitably, the people chose to bomb much more indiscriminately Cuba and used their weaponry against the sites in Cuba, killing lots of innocent Cubans, men, women, and children who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time in Cuba, and were much, much more careful about how they use weaponry in occupied Florida. And I was showing them that this isn't the golden rule. What you're willing to inflict on your own people, that's as much as you can inflict on the other people. So, you can't show that favoritism of your own nation. It's counterintuitive. But the golden rule says, that's how we judge what euphemistically military people call collateral damage. Yeah. If I was bombing a city of my own people to liberate it from unjust aggression and occupation, I would be willing to accept a certain amount of collateral damage. But whatever I'm willing to accept for my own that's the most I can inflict on another people. Yes. So that's how you figure out proportionality.
Great segue to the bomb. Mm-hmm. Now, I wrote this novel, which it's not in here, but in my novel, it's a historical novel, and I go through part of the time period is the Second World War, and I did a lot of research on the bombs, the two bombs that went off over there. And I don't remember the numbers, but Monsignor, the devastation was incredible. And then the long-term effects, which we don't think about, the long-term effects, it's grotesque. Mm-hmm. So I'll just say it like this. All of this lead up, please tell me that the atomic bombs in Japan were wrong, because I feel like they were really wrong.
They were on multiple levels. First, proportionality.
I got it right.
Yeah. Well, First, proportionality was, the military targets in those cities, and there were some, were nowhere near serious enough to accept the incredible short-term and long-term collateral damage that was done to the people of Japan. But it wasn't just the dropping of the nuclear devices that was unjust. The firebombing of Tokyo was immoral. Yeah. We firebombed Tokyo particularly to burn the houses of the innocent civilians in Tokyo. Robert McNamara, in his very interesting documentary he did towards the end of his life, called The Fog of War, a line from Clausewitz, a great military strategist and ethician, admitted that he and Curtis LeMay, he was on Curtis LeMay's staff, and McNamara was making a lot of the decisions about where to bomb, at what altitude, and what devices to use. He admitted that if we had lost the war, that he and Curtis LeMay, General LeMay, would have been tried as war criminals, and we would have been rightfully found guilty. He admits that in his.
But the victors get to write the history, right?
Wow. Right, because
that's
the
a
decisions,
statement.
The decisions that were made in carpet bombing of Dresden is another example. Now, obviously, the fascists were doing all kinds of immoral things, and they were doing equally. The bombings of the Blitz and the London, were immoral. Coventry and the like. So both sides, but two wrongs don't make a right in our bombing decisions. But the tragedy, and this is the tragedy of all immorality. Immorality is always tragic, but if you can read history with a little bit of distance, you can see how it happens. We knew in 1946 that the dropping of the bombs were not necessary. So one of the things we've talked about, jus ad bellum, justice of war.
Yes.
There's jus in bello.
Yes.
The justice in war. Every action in war has to be just as best as it can be. And so this is an individual bombing decision. And one of the criteria that's slightly different than the justice of war is, instead of last resort, we say, is it militarily necessary? Mm. And so a group of some of the best minds in the Truman administration, people like Paul Nietzsche and people like this, they were young state officials and up-and-coming military people, along with some of the senior command. They studied all the documents. They studied where Japan was. And they did an after-action report that the military does all the time. And it's in the Truman Library right by my college. I've gone over and accessed it there. And it says quite clearly, the after-action report written in 1946, that if we had not dropped the bombs, Japan still would have surrendered, probably by the end of November, but most definitely by the end of the calendar year. Even if the Russians hadn't declared war, even if we hadn't dropped the bomb, even if we hadn't invaded, that none of that was necessary, they would have surrendered. The only thing that was holding up any of this was the role that the emperor would play post-war. And this is where America has a structure of sin that it needs to reject in its war-making history. We always insist on unconditional surrender. And unconditional surrender is always wrong. You cannot impose upon your enemy anything more than meeting the just cause you're fighting for. So unconditional surrender means we can do anything to you. You have no rights. You have no, you have to unconditionally surrender. People can continue to fight. Like, for example, we let them keep the emperor, to keep the war going on for something that we were willing to give anyhow. It's just suicidal and stupid, but it's also immoral. Unconditional surrender. I don't know why America has this fascination with absolutism when it comes to imposing. I think it goes back to kind of a Puritan ethic, but it's not just war tradition. It's always wrong. You can only ask your enemy to meet the just causes. Now, there can be auxiliary things that go along with the just cause because of an aggressor. So, for example, you can require a enemy to disarm. You can require an enemy that has a pernicious ideology to dissolve the party of that ideology, like we did with Nazi National Socialism in Germany. But you can't impose an unconditional surrender on your enemy because they have rights. They have, you can't require of them things that would be immoral.
I'd never considered that, and it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to let them retain some dignity.
Right.
I mean, just in any of your daily dealings with somebody, even if you are victorious over them in a business deal or an argument, you always want to leave somebody a back door, so they can walk out with their head held high.
Well, because you're a lawyer, an ethical lawyer, and folks, there are many of them.
There's a few out there.
Yeah. An ethical lawyer, when they see the other side make a mistake that would be much to their disadvantage in a negotiation or whatever, or they've left something out that could later, they show them that. They correct that. They say, no, that's not in your best interest.
Right.
Because what you want at the end is a just solution.
Yes.
You want to pay a just price for, let's say you're buying property, a just price for the property you're buying. You don't want to take advantage of the other. It would be immoral to do so. So, and similarly, you don't, when we're fighting a war, we're fighting to stop the aggression.
I actually had a lawyer in a case who the other side of the lawsuit revealed something in the discovery process that our lawyers first saw, and our lawyer said, "Wait a minute, I don't think they meant to show us this. I think this was a mistake because I would not have shown this if it was us." They went back to the lawyer and said, "Did you intend to show us this?" And he went, "Oh my gosh, no, I didn't." So our lawyer informed us they revealed something. I'm not going to tell you what it is, and it was like I hated it because I want to know what it is.
Yeah.
But it was the just thing to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a perfect example of what you were saying there. Anyway.
Yeah. So it turns out that it was militarily and politically unnecessary.
Yes.
As well as disproportionate.
Hey guys, did you know that the Conor Gallagher Show is also on Spotify and Apple Podcast? Be sure to go over there and give us a follow. Thanks so much. Now back to the episode. I think you wrote an article on the 80th anniversary somewhat recently.
Yes.
On kind of this topic of they were going to surrender, Japan was going to surrender anyway.
Right.
I think the common narrative that I've always heard is they were never going to surrender no matter what. And
that's a story we tell ourselves, partly to placate, quite frankly, I think placate our consciences, some of the things we did, that, a million men would be. I mean, I have heard it from the War II generation. I wouldn't be alive today. I was ready to evade all that. And there's no doubt if we had invaded the homeland that they probably would have fought very tenaciously like they did at Okinawa, like they did at Hiroshima. By the way, I got to do an aside on this.
Please.
I don't know if you know Coach Holtz, but
Sure.
When he was coaching William and Mary, way before he was at Notre Dame, he came to play a game at the Naval Academy. And at Navy Marine Corps Stadium at Annapolis, we don't have the Hall of Fame players or our championships up on around the sides of the stadium. We have famous naval battles. So Coach Holtz tells the story that he's waiting with his William and Mary team to be announced to run into the field, and his players are looking up, and they don't know their history very well, so they're mispronouncing Iwo Jima, Guadalcanal, and Okinawa, and he turns to them and says, "Now that's a tough schedule."
The football schedule. That's funny.
Yeah, but yes, they would have probably fought tenaciously, and it would have been. But we didn't have to do that invasion. And again, they had diplomatically. We now know because the Soviet papers have been. A lot of them the archives have been opened that they were trying through the Russians to sue for peace. Some of the government, and of course it was chaos. War is always the fog of war. There is chaos. Who was actually the decision maker? The emperor was always the last decision, but how much was he being influenced by, and all of that. So there's always those questions. But again, the best minds in the United States, looking at the after action report, were unequivocal that we didn't have to do it, and we wouldn't have had to do it.
In what scenario would weapons of mass destruction be permissible?
I think we should keep a huge taboo on the use of weapons of mass destruction so that we never use them, even if theoretically you could come up with a situation where they could be legitimately used. I'll give you the clearest example where they could be legitimately used. And at one stage in the Cold War, I can now say this, we had these kind of weapons. But let's say you have, China is building a navy up very quickly. It's getting very large, and it's getting better and better with each generation of warships. If an invasion force of a naval force from some nation like China were coming, they're in the middle of the ocean, and you got the entire fleet there. You could theoretically use like a nuclear tipped torpedo to take out their biggest ships, and of course, lots of ships around them. And the radiation would be dissipated in the ocean. There'd still be radiation leakage, but there would not be that much collateral damage. You would only attack military targets who were actually on their way to aggress against an innocent third party. So you could come up with a theoretical use of a weapon of mass destruction where it would only be military targets. In the time when I was in the 80s, for example, we had scenarios. General Hackett, who was a British general, wrote about some novels about these kind of tactics, so they're out there in the public domain, where tactical nuclear weapons would be used against armored columns coming from the Soviet bloc, things like that. So you can come up with theoretical cases, but I think there's such a taboo about crossing that line that even if you could come up with a theoretical case where a weapon of mass destruction would be legitimate, be proportionate, it would only target military targets, all those things, it still shouldn't be used because we're crossing that line, which is a line I just think we shouldn't cross.
So should we disarm, or should we keep a stockpile and keep testing them?
Well, I believe we have a serious problem with our current nuclear policy, and that is that we intend to kill the innocent of our enemies. We don't just accept it, we intend it. Deterrence ultimately only works, we think, and the other side thinks, so both sides are doing it, that if we take what's called counter value in nuclear ethics discussions and in targeting discussions, we talk about counter force versus counter value. And obviously what I just described, attacking a fleet, is a counter force. But ultimately, deterrence is based on counter value, that you're going to take away from the enemy something he values so much that he won't risk losing it. And that always comes down to its people and its economic and social infrastructure, political, economic, social infrastructure. That counter value fallback, that's what we're really deterring by threatening that, is always wrong. You can never intend to kill the innocent, either conditionally or actually. And every nuclear deterrent choice is a choice to conditionally. If they bomb us first, we're going to blow up their cities. That's what it is. That's mutual assured destruction. It really is still that policy. And that's the problem with deterrence as we currently embody it. Now, we've come a long way. We've reduced nuclear numbers significantly. We're less on that hair trigger that we were in my time in the military. I served on nuclear subs. One of the subs I served on, Mariano G. Vallejo, had 16 MIRV missiles. That's a multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles, MIRV. So theoretically, I did not have the security clearance to know exactly. I don't know if even the skipper knew exactly what was on the ship. I would assume he did, but probably the weapons officer and he were the only two that would. But theoretically, those 16 missiles on my sub had 10 independently retargetable reentry vehicles, each with a bomb 10 to 15 times bigger than the bombs that dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So theoretical, our one sub could blow up 160 cities, 10 to 30 times bigger than Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Well, that's the doomsday machine.
Oh my gosh.
Khrushchev and Kennedy both said it, and they're both right, that if there ever was a nuclear war, the living would envy the dead because of what would happen as far as the fallout and the nuclear winter and all of that to the world. So that weapon that I was part of, I realized I could never pull the trigger. I could never follow an order. I would never have turned the key. That's why I got out of nuclear subs. I can say that now. I didn't say that at the time because I didn't want to ruin my career. I was a little cowardly, but I couldn't do what that we were training to do. And every day we were practicing to.
And you had that thought on the sub.
Yeah, as a 19-year-old. Yeah. So, so it is a problem with our current deterrent that we at the end of the day, what the intent really is to threaten the innocence of the other side to the point that they won't do anything we don't want them to do. And of course, the other side's doing that to us as well. And so you're holding the world's population it's like you have a gun to their head and say, if we don't like it, we're gonna shoot your innocence.
All right. So I'm going to do something that's probably not very nice.
Okay.
You said we can never intentionally kill the innocent.
Right.
Then why did God instruct the Israelites to destroy the Amalekites, women, children, livestock, everything?
Yeah. Now, here's where I got to get into deferring to biblical scholars that are more apropos in answering these questions than I can. Matt Ramage has an wonderful book called Hard Passages. He's one of my former students. He's teaching at Benedictine. He's a brilliant man, trying to work out some of this. As
Hard Passages.
Yep.
That sounds like a podcast episode.
Yeah.
I need to have that guy on.
Yeah.
Okay, Hard Passages. What's his name?
Dr. Matthew Ramage.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Because aren't the hard passages the fun ones?
Well,
grapple with. I like that.
The Jesuit, the German Jesuit Karl Rahner, who was so influential in his lifetime, he says that if you want to interpret theology correctly and the scriptures correctly, start with the difficult passages.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I'm not sure that's always true. I'm another story for another day.
Yeah.
But you would have to go to each passage and look. I think a lot of what's interpreted, I can take a step back. We understand the dynamics of choice making much, much more refined because of philosophy, the philosophical work. The first that really started sorting out the difference between permissive will and causative will were the Greeks. The great explosion in philosophical precision that comes from Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and their successors. So remember, God has to work with the human constructs that we have, the way before the Greco-Roman philosophical explosion, precision, the understanding of the difference between permissive will and causative will and all of that was not sorted out. So God causes everything. So things are imputed unto God as God causing it. And yes, it's in his permissive will. He permits all kinds of evil because he'll bring good out of it. But to directly say God intended it, that gets us into a theological problem. To say that God intended evil, and I think taking of human life is always evil, is, I think, problematic. I think God permits it. So I think some of the Old Testament passages that are difficult, like Abraham being ordered to sacrifice Isaac, I think the Lord said, Abraham was a man of prayer. I think in his prayer, Abraham started to idolize Isaac because he was the child of the promise. And God was really testing him in his prayer, saying, do you love Isaac more than me? Have you put Isaac above me? It's so easy for us in human relations to make a human relation more important than God, a relationship with God. And I think God was challenging Abraham. What's first? If I ask you to give up Isaac, will you be willing to do that? And if not, then you maybe have made an idol out of Isaac. So I think Abraham hears this and says, I got to do that.
What about if
that's my read of these tough passages? Then you have to go to each one.
Well, what if the little bit I understand about the Amalekites, again, I'm not the biblical scholar either, but these were nations versus nations. And, our concept of total war, where it's like everyone's involved in the war effort, The Amalekites were like terrorists that were constantly following the Israelites and attacking at every possible, corner. Whenever a small group of Israelites would get broken off from the bigger clan, the Amalekites would take them down. The women existed for the sake of breeding more soldiers. The children were constantly training in the war effort. Yeah. This is total war. And it's not like you have soldiers and then you have civilians. Everyone's a soldier in a certain way. And so is that possibly part of the justification of saying we have to annihilate these people because they're hurting the chosen people, and their whole society is attacking our whole society? It's not like soldiers versus civilians.
Yeah. I have to say, I do not fully
That's my theory.
know the mind of God, and I only go with what he revealed.
Right.
Obviously, I mean, using other passages, there are passages where people are wiped out because the Israelites are commanded not to intermingle.
Yeah.
I think God said, you can't intermingle with these people. You'll take on their gods, you'll take on their customs, you'll do immoral things. And they interpreted it, the only way to do that is to wipe them out. I think it would have been much better if they converted them. And I think that's part of what we now see, that we have alternatives we can convert people to the truth. We can bring them into the fold. There are no others. There's just friends we haven't met yet. Yeah, that's right. Great line by Abraham Lincoln. How do you win? You make your enemies your friends. It's what I call, with my students, a twofer. You eliminate your enemy, but you also establish a friendship.
No, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, it is a difficult passage, but that's why I asked it. Yeah. You can't blame me for asking. That's why I said it was an unfair question.
Yeah.
All right. So going back to the idea of kind of like you mentioned that who was it that said the survivors of an atomic war would be jealous of the dead?
Yeah, I don't know who to ever credit, because I don't know who said it first, but both Khrushchev and Kennedy said it at different times in the 60s.
Well, a lot of us talk about EMPs a lot, electromagnetic pulses, where it's essentially like a bomb that goes off in the atmosphere and it kills all the electrical grid. So, I mean, I think I know the answer to this, but it's one thing to drop a bomb that goes kaboom and just annihilates everything on the ground. It's another thing to set off a bomb in the sky, in the atmosphere, that makes all the electric grid to go down. People will suffer, but they're not going to die instantly. Like, I guess there are some people that die instantly if you're on like a breathing machine, or, if you have to have kidney dialysis. But, I read this really cool novel called 1 Second After. Actually takes place here in North Carolina, in Black Mountain, North Carolina. And it's about what happens if an EMP goes off. And, day one, nothing happens. Within a week, everyone has robbed the grocery stores because there's just no electric anything. Cars don't work except for really old ones. But people in hospitals pretty much die in a day or two because they don't have the electric, or I guess some of them have generators that run for a few days. But then, now the pharmacies can't provide medications. And so, diabetics are dying. Within 30 days, everyone's hunting deer, everywhere. Forget the hunting season laws. Like, you're just within 6 months, people are eating their own animals, their own pets. All the cattle's gone, everything's gone. And within a year, they're eating each other. Cannibalism sets in, so that's kind of like the pace of what happens. So it's a long-term devastation. And I think that's an EMP is probably an option that I would think the military looks at and says, we don't have to just blow up everybody like with Nagasaki or something. We could do an EMP and, shut down their whole grid. And then we'll go in and help rebuild them before they start eating each other. You follow what I'm saying? So I wonder if that would be
with every nuclear weapon, there's a scale. During the Conor administration, you're too young to know this, but they were talking about a neutron bomb that would not blow up buildings but kill the people, where all of it would be engineered to be a radiation device that would kill people but leave the buildings intact.
Wow.
So, that's on one scale. And every nuclear device has some kind of EMP involved with it. I mean, it's part of as I understand it. I have to go back and check my physics on this, but I'm pretty sure that's right. So the point is, to have an EMP that's targeted that way. Now, obviously, people know that this is a possibility. So I'm sure, and I don't know because I'm not in the business anymore, but I'm sure the military is if you will, hardening certain things to keep that from being total devastation.
Yeah.
But you're right; it would affect a lot of, and hopefully we remember how to do things before there was computers. It drives me crazy when the power goes out, which unfortunately it does frequently in Kansas City, Kansas, because our power lines are still above ground. And so whenever there's a storm and, wind and we lose, nobody can do change. No one can do it. And I go, there was a time we used to use ledgers and legal pads, and we actually knew how to make change without the computer telling us how to do it.
Yeah.
So hopefully we remember there's a way of living without modern electronics. That being said, it's a good reminder that how vulnerable, and we've seen this in different occasions. Look how vulnerable we were as a society during COVID with the kind of breakdowns we had as far as stopping everything. We weren't thinking ahead of how will we cope in a time. In antiquity, my chapel at the college is named after Blessed Francis Xavier Sealos. He died in a yellow fever epidemic in New Orleans, Redemptorist priest, beatified by St. John Paul II in 2000. He was heroic, and the people in New Orleans loved him because he stayed and took care of people during a pandemic. It's not like it's something new. So there's ancient wisdom that we need to keep alive, and also recognize that life is not, our gadgets aren't life. Relationships are life. And that's what's most important. Our relationship, first of all, the one that I call with a capital R, with God. And then through God, all others in God. And so, we should be able to carry on even if all our gadgets were taken away. Though you're right, there'd be great suffering if they were immediately taken away like that.
What about some modern warfare issues like drones?
Yeah, I've written several editorials for the National Catholic Register and some other sources on the use of drones. In many ways, it's just another way of delivering deadly force. It's like any other plane, except this one happens to be operated with someone who's thousands of miles away, perhaps from the actual weaponry. So the calculation of a just attack from a drone is much like the moral calculation involved in the just attack with an airplane, bomber or fighter, or combination. So in that sense, it's not different. The question becomes, I wrote first about this in the Obama administration when he had the euphemistically called, and I wish they had come up with another name, the kill list, where the administration came up with terrorists that were involved in ongoing aggression against real innocents because they were carrying out the worldwide war on terror. And after they vetted them and put them on the kill list, if we discovered where they were, they would be liable if conditions were right to drone attack. At the time, I said that this could well be legitimate. First of all, they did go out of their way to keep collateral damage to a very, very minimum. And they did not, from what I could tell, make many mistakes on the people they actually vetted and put onto the list. They did make some, and there was a couple of attacks that turned out to be false identities or false. There's the legal question of attacking Americans that way, because some of the people they attacked were former American citizens. I think you give up your citizenship once you enter into hostile activities against the country. That's my read of so I did not see that as a legal problem. But long story short, I think it can be legitimately used. Here's the dangers, too. One, because a pilot's not placing him or herself at risk in the attack, it can be easier for a commander or chief or a military commander to make that call to send, instead of having to send someone in harm's way, you just send a drone. Yeah. And you're not putting any of your people at personnel. So you can make the decision to use deadly force more readily. So you have to guard that you're not doing that. The second thing, and we have to make sure this never happens, there is movement afoot, and there's already been one use of it, of fully making these drones fully autonomous, meaning that a human wouldn't have to intervene for there to be deadly force used. You would program your drone that when certain criteria were met, like you see a tank and you recognize the tank, and the tank meets the criteria of a enemy, then you bomb the tank. But no human actually says fire.
So it's an AI pilot.
Yes, and these are actually, some of them were made. Turkey actually made one that we used in a conflict, a civil war conflict in Libya. I hope that this one was, as I understand it, was programmed to attack troop carriers. We do not want to go down that ride. It's not just bad science fiction, or good science fiction that about the Terminator and all that. This is where you go if you fully automatic. But it makes there should always be a human decision maker who ethically makes a decision to use deadly force only as a last resort, only proportionally, only in a just cause, all the criteria we've talked about.
Do you think that could be an actual law passed that prevents something like that? I mean, there's going to have to be a whole wave of AI legislation at some point.
Well, this is the kind of, I hope, worldwide treaty that every nation would join. Yes, no autonomous weapons. Because it's just, you can easily imagine them getting out of hands and starting wars all over the place, because they could go rogue, but second, they could, it could too easily slip into the unjust use of deadly force. Now, my joke is, and I get this from Monsignor Lorenzo Albacete, so it's not original to me. He says, well, if that's the case, all we have to do is put big Groucho Marx noses on all our tanks, and then we fool the AI. I said, I don't think that's going to work for long, but yeah.
Well, we've talked about, I got a lot of other modern questions, but we did talk about World War II, and I've heard that it was called the Good War. Have you heard that phrase?
I actually used it a little in one of my writings on the anniversary of the victory in Europe, the E-Day.
That's right.
Partly, I wanted to talk about all the virtues that went into winning World War II. A lot of people look back, that if you knew that generation well, a lot of people look back and reminisced about how we pulled together as a people. I heard this all the time when I was in England about, yes, we had all these sufferings in World War II, but we were one people. We were united, and it was kind of a nostalgia almost for that unity. Well, there was incredible unity, and there was willingness to sacrifice. There was rationing, even here in the United States. As abundant as we were in so many ways, people were rationing butter and sugar and rubber, and they were collecting their pots and pans to turn into metals for the factories. The factories went to work and turned out armaments at an incredible rate. We were turning out, at the end of the war, we were turning out a small carrier every week. Yeah. A tremendous amount of coming together, focused on winning a war that needed to be won against terrible ideologies and against real aggression. So there was a lot of virtues, and part of it was inventiveness and enterprise and industriousness. I feature, for example, one of the people that helped make the small boats that invented the Higgins boats, as they were called, that helped make the amphibious march through the Pacific and D-Day possible. That was American ingenuity. That was American. So there was a lot of virtues that went into it. Now, don't get me wrong, as we've talked about, there were things that were done wrong, but there was a lot of virtues that went in, and the heroic sacrifice of the many, many men and women who died fighting fascism.
So, looking at the devastation that like a Hitler caused, mm-hmm. and I don't know exactly where this fits, but in proportionality and all of this subject matter, like what the end never justifies the means, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. This is a silly question, but I've talked about it with my sons again mm-hmm. over cigars. We have all these mm-hmm. interesting conversations, and mm-hmm. and there was a somewhat of a split decision on this. Mm-hmm. I take a very strong position. Mm-hmm. Are you ready? If baby Hitler was drowning, mm-hmm. would you save him?
Well, of course you don't have the knowledge, and baby Hitler was innocent somewhere along the line. And remember what I should have probably said this much earlier. I just sometimes take things for granted because you're used to the field.
Yeah.
Innocent doesn't mean morally innocent, because none of us are morally innocent. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So in that sense, we all deserve death, as the scriptures make clear. Now, praise be to God. God rescued us from that condition through our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. But innocence in just war theory comes from its ancient understanding in, not, nosit. We get noxious from notion, not harming. When we say, is someone innocent in war, we're talking about, are they harming?
Right.
So that's why it's legitimate to bomb a munitions factory that has all those people working in the munitions factory who otherwise, if they were home at their houses with their wives and families, they would be considered innocent civilians. They're innocent.
They have a janitor in that building that's not making bombs.
Right.
So you're killing the janitor.
Well, that's a legitimate collateral situation. Right. But the reason they become a legitimate target when they're in the factory, because they're part of the war machine that is harming.
Right.
But when they're in their homes and they're just a family man or woman, they're not liable to attack because they are not involved in the ongoing aggression.
They're not on the battlefield. So
right. They're doing the stuff that we do every day, making dinner, cleaning the house, taking care of the kids. So we make the distinction that you become, you can only attack those who are involved in actual harming.
Then how do you ever win a terrorist-based war?
Well, that's the thing. And I have written in the first Trump administration, Soleimani, when he attacked that Iranian general, I did write an editorial for the National Catholic Group. Why that was legitimate. Tell me what. Well, that was legitimate because he was the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard.
Okay.
And so he's a walking command, control, and communication center. The leadership in a war becomes targets because they are the central key of the aggression. And so and in most cases, if they're a military general or admiral, if they're the commander in chief, like the head of the state would be in most structures. It's slightly different where there's a king and a prime minister. The king might not be because it depends on the circumstances. But the people who are involved in the ongoing aggression, especially those who are, as I put it, command control communication centers, they are legitimate targets all the time because they're always involved in the aggression. Unless they can solve that situation by surrendering. What's the right thing for someone involved in an unjust war to do? Surrender. Stop the aggression.
Right.
Admit they're wrong.
This is a terrible question. I don't know if this is terrible to ask, but I'm trying to get to the core of, you don't have the end justify the means, but you do have a concept like the principle of double effect.
Right. And that's what I'm talking about, that you're attacking to stop the command, control, and communication.
Right.
You're attacking the bomb manufacturer, not to kill the people inside, but to stop them making bombs.
Well, you have.
That's why, if you notice, a lot of times the United States now chooses to attack military sites at night when there's very few people there. Because even military sites, they'll say, we're not trying to kill
people,
the civilians that work there and the armed forces that work there. We're trying to stop the aggression that's coming from that facility. It's what we did when we attacked Iran's nuclear facilities.
But when it's just a terrorist organization, it's like they don't have that infinfrastructure, and it's even harder to do.
So yeah, it is where there's a merger. Well, you see it all the time. I've been to Israel over 20 times, and I worked a little bit with the Israeli military during my time in the military. And one of the things that they were always very concerned about, it's one of the reasons they built the walls they did, though I find that problematic when you go to the holy sites, is that people would walk into pizza parlors and blow themselves up. Yeah. And so they had to defend their innocence from these, where the terrorist makes himself or herself the weapon.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I feel terrible asking this question, but you have the situation, which I hear about, where these terrorists use innocent children as their shields, but they have a bomb strapped to themselves, so they could end up killing a whole bunch of people, or you shoot this guy and will likely kill this kid. Yeah. Is that principle of double effect, so you can pull the trigger? I mean, it's a terrible question.
No,
but it's a real question.
When your enemy turns innocent people or innocent places that should never be attacked, all things being equal, cultural sites, churches, mosques, hospitals, schools, these things are off the lawful targets. By the way, there's for people who are interested in this, there's some wonderful articles that are declassified or unclassified about the care that the American military takes in designating someplace a target or not in an armed conflict. For example, the Air Force has an article out that's called "In Search of Lawful Targets," and it's written from a legal perspective, looking at the laws of armed conflict from a legal perspective. But it's very good at showing how carefully the military vets these sites. But if the enemy turns what otherwise would be an illegitimate target into a military site of ongoing aggression because of their choices, then it's not our fault that they've turned their schools or their hospitals into a military site or a barracks. I first dealt with this in looking at some of the decisions in bombing in North Vietnam, where they would put anti-aircraft missiles or guns on hospitals or near schools. And see, that's the decision the enemy makes to militarize that which should not be militarized. Just like sometimes churches and mosques are turned into places, where a sniper will go up in the bell tower or the minaret. They've chosen to militarize what would otherwise be an illegitimate target. Even there, of course, you want to take care not to destroy culture and history and religious sites for obvious reasons and trying to make a just peace. And you think of the classic, again, unfortunate they didn't need to do it, the bombing of Monte Cassino that totally destroyed that site.
Yeah.
So
Benedict's one of the first big monasteries he built.
Yeah. So, but as far as this question of child soldiers and the use of civilians as weapons is a real problem for American military, and they have done a lot of work on this. I was on a doctoral dissertation with someone who had to write the laws of armed conflict for Mogadishu.
Really?
During the time, and the use of child soldiers was the norm there, and then usually put them at point, because they thought they could, perhaps get people to hesitate and gain advantages in certain ambush situations. But a child soldier made a soldier by the other side. They've militarized their kids, and as tragic as that is, that's the choice they've made. And you do have a right to defend yourself and others, even from a child soldier. Now, sadly, these children are often brainwashed. They're often drugged. They're often ruined for life because of what they've endured. But now
you just have to trust in the mercy of God.
Exactly.
That's all you can do.
Exactly.
You brought up Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
Just macro level.
Mm-hmm.
Should we have gone to Vietnam? Was this a just war?
Well, it was right to want to stop communism spreading. And if you look at post-war Vietnam, I don't think it's better off with communist government. In fact, the only thing good coming out is they're starting to soften their communism, but there's still persecution of Christians. There's still persecution of the church. It wasn't wrong for us to want to stop communism from taking over Vietnam. Neither, where we made the mistake, of course, was post-World War II, when we let the colonial powers reclaim their colonial territory. That was unjust. If we had not done that, we would have saved the world a lot of conflicts. Now, some places weren't fully ready, I agree, to have independence. We see
Wait, you lost me.
Yeah.
Let's go back. So we're now going back to World War II.
Yep.
And I was essentially going to, at one point, ask you about the post-bellum, Juice post-bellum, which is almost like the third, or you'd say use post-bellum, the third part of just war theory. Yeah. To recap, you got use ad bellum, use in bello, and then use post-bellum. Mm-hmm. Did I get that right?
I think so.
Okay. But that's like that justice after the war. Is that what you were just referring to? Like what we did, and what did we call it post World War II? I'm showing my ignorance on the. Was it not McCarthy? It was the what was the
Marshall Plan?
The Marshall Plan, not McCarthy.
The Marshall Plan was one of the great examples of benevolence.
And we were trying to bring order.
Right.
Did you just make a reference to?
Well, the Marshall Plan helped rebuild our enemies.
Okay,
and we did a phenomenal job.
Yeah.
I mean, two of our closest friends today, Japan and Germany, are because of what we did with the Marshall Plan, and that's a great example of benevolence. It wasn't perfect benevolence, but it was very virtuous of us and the right thing to do. Allowing, especially the French and the Brits, our allies during World War II, to re-colonialize their former territories after the war, or to continue colonial rule. I think we should have been encouraging them to get out very quickly.
Now I got you.
Because Ho Chi Minh, if you look at his early life, he was inspired by the American Revolution. Ho Chi Minh, the leader of the North Vietnamese.
Okay.
He was inspired by the American Revolution. He was inspired by our constitutional system. He only left that because his enemies at the first were the French, who recolonized his people. And of course, he won the splitting of North and South Vietnam. That was after defeating the French.
Okay.
So, but he was, brought into the communist sphere because basically the West rejected, him as a, the kind of leader like we didn't reject India having those kind of leaders.
But this would have all fit underneath preventing them from recolonizing. That would have fit in your mind underneath that third element of like
I personally think,
post-bellum.
This is not a Catholic position. It's just my personal thinking of someone who dabbles in these areas, that much of the post-World War II military action that America's forced into, it's because we end up stepping into where the colonial powers eventually withdraw because they can't keep up their presence. And we stumble over ourselves trying to uphold a system that the French and British, you see it in everywhere. You see it in Lebanon, you see it in throughout the Middle East, you see it in large parts of Africa, Southeast Asia, colonialism came with many, many problems. And don't get me wrong, it did some good, but it came with many, many problems, and its ending has been very poorly handled. That being said, that it wasn't wrong to want to protect South Vietnam from the takeover of communist North, and we were right to want to check the spread of communism. Communism is a hideous ideology. It's a false ideology with a false anthropology, false vision of the human person. Obviously, is atheistic, and it, wherever it goes, it destroys, and especially it kills Christians. Millions of martyrs from communism. Still going on in parts of the world, but the way the Vietnam War was fought was problematic. And the very first Catholic bishop to oppose that I can find that explicitly came out and said that the way we're doing this is unjust and that we should think about withdrawing if this is the way we're going to do it was Fulton Sheen.
Really?
Yeah, the most anti-communist guy you can think of, the strongest pro-American guy you can think of in the hierarchy. He, in 1967, came out against the Vietnam War.
On what grounds? Like, what was he saying was wrong with it?
He didn't think we were fighting to win. He thought we were, fighting. I don't know if he'd use this language. I don't want to put words in his mouth. Not to lose, but he thought that we weren't being proportionate, and the way we were fighting it wasn't just.
And you hear about these atrocities, and you mentioned, you actually an hour ago or so, you talked about the My Lai massacre, and we didn't really go into that. I wanted to pause you and say, explain that, because that's actually it's in my first book, If Aristotle's Kid Had an iPod, actually. It's a strange way I connected it, but tell us a little bit about that, because that's a famous situation.
Lieutenant Calley, who was a fairly low-ranking officer in the Army, he ordered, after some frustration with a village that had, in his opinion, people that attacked him had come from this village. In frustration, he decided to wipe out the whole village, and he ordered his men to kill everybody and to burn it down. And some of his men followed his orders and killed innocent women and civilians and elderly and young people. Famously, we now know that there was helicopters in the area that came down and stopped some of the killing, got between Lieutenant Calley's men and some innocents and saved their lives. But the Army rightfully tried him for war crimes. He was found guilty. The men who followed his orders were also found guilty because they followed unlawful orders. Now, that's where my first introduction to just war theory came, because the Navy realized that we weren't doing a good job training our enlisted men the difference between a lawful order and an unlawful order. And so we had to do better at that. And that's how I first got involved in teaching this stuff.
My memory's failing me, but there was a guy who refused to follow those orders and stood, I think he was the helicopter pilot that stood in front of Calley and his men.
I think what they did was bring his helicopter down and got between, and it was kept secret for the longest time. And then when it became known, and they never gave the guy a medal, but I think just recently, I want to say in the last couple of years, he was honored. He
was. And here's the thing: there's on the bottom of this pile of bodies, they found a young boy who was alive. And that boy, who grew up and was now an older man, he came to the award ceremony.
Oh, I did not know that. That's beautiful.
They gave to this, and I'm forgetting his name, but the pilot who who stood in between and resisted Calley and his men. So, That's it. Yeah.
Hugh Thompson. Let's go out to do some more research.
It's a great story. Yeah. But yeah, the little boy who basically his courage saved went to his. I love those kinds of stories. So, all right, that's Vietnam. We talked about drones. I do want to talk a little bit about Ukraine and Russia. We're not fighting it per se, but I think it would be considered a proxy war where we're providing weapons, we're providing money. What do you have to say about all of that?
Well, first, Ukraine is a tragedy because real innocents are being killed left, right, and center. And unfortunately, especially on the Russian side, they're treating their enlisted people like fodder, not just their own, but I'm no fan of the North Korean system, but the North Koreans that were detailed to Russia were treated, just basically as literally cannon fodder, and the vast majority of them have been killed. So this is it's just so tragic, but it really begins with an unjust, aggressive leader. Vladimir Putin wants to reestablish much of the Soviet or Russian Empire, and his invasion of Crimea should have been. That's where we should have stopped it. We should have said, no, there's not going to be gain by aggression. Unfortunately, President Obama was pretty feckless, I think, at that time. That's probably harsh to say. That's probably judgmental. But we had signed an agreement with Ukraine when they gave up their nuclear weapons, because with the breakdown of the Soviet Union, there was a lot of nuclear weapons stationed in what is now Ukraine. And they agreed in the 90s to give that up. President Clinton, on behalf of the United States, signed an agreement. The British did as well, and the Russians, with the Ukrainians, that we would recognize and protect their borders. And they gave up their nuclear weapons. Well, so we had a moral obligation to defend that nation's borders. And the fact that we did not do more to keep Russia from aggressing and taking a huge and vitally important part of Ukraine in 2014 is just gross. It's a gross breaking of our word. And if I was in Taiwan, if I was in other places where there are treaties defending that says the United States will come to our defense, I'd be very worried, because we've shown ourselves not to be very trustworthy right now. So we should have stopped this aggression at the very beginning. It's sort of like the Munich situation that led to World War II. If they had stopped Hitler's aggression early on, when he took part of what was then Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, we might not have had World War II, at least as it turned out to be. A world war that killed literally millions. So, I mean, unchecked aggression is a real problem. Now, what happened, of course, is he got away with it in Crimea. So, I joke sometimes as a boss. My staff has banned me from saying this, but I used to always say, I don't want much, I just want more.
Right.
But that's the way an unjust aggressor is. He doesn't want much, he just wants more. And so he wants more of Ukraine. And, what you see is this ongoing. Now, he's couching it as, I'm threatened by NATO. I'm threatened. But NATO's a defensive. It's a defensive. It's a defensive alliance. I would argue that it's obviously a defensive alliance. And, that to me is just rhetoric, because he wants to reestablish the greater Russian Empire, the Soviet Empire back. And he is a classic aggressive dictator. And so I think it's in our own interest to make sure he does not succeed. We're all stymied at what to do. I mean, I hate, sometimes I think what we're doing, we're going to fight to the last Ukrainian, which isn't fair to Ukraine or anyone else. I think President Trump's tried to bring a negotiated ceasefire, which at least is the first step towards a peace. So right now, that's what I would say. Let's get the best ceasefire we can, keep the killing let's stop the killing, and then see if we can work towards a just resolution. And I think we should treat the territory that Russia seized as occupied territory, just like we do in other places where an aggressor has occupied territory. Occupied territory is never recognized as part of the country, and eventually it should be returned to its rightful ruler.
Any thoughts on Zelensky?
Yeah, it's right now, I mean, he did something heroic. I think he really rose to the occasion, especially given his background. That he was more an actor, comedian than he was a politician. Definitely not a military man. I would say that, right now he's an ally because he's fighting against aggression. If all things were equal, I don't think we'd find many of his ideological positions ones that would be compatible with, let's say, Catholic social teaching. But right now he's an ally because, just like Stalin was an ally in World War II. It's not that bad, but he's an ally because he's fighting against real aggression. Yeah.
All right. What about how just war theory kind of applies to other aspects of life? So I'm now kind of bringing it all the way down to, like proportionality. Like my dad and I actually talk a little bit about sometimes, this argument's not worth having, or, taking on this issue is not worth taking on because of the likelihood of success.
Right.
He's looked at me, son, you're not going to win this argument. So what's the point in having it? I mean, just in general in life, there's some wisdom in that, and so
and we're debating that right now. And should we legalize marijuana, for example, or decriminalize it? And that's the exact argument we have: is the enforcement of the law disproportionate to what we gain by not having it? Now, I was kind of liberal on this until I saw it in practice, and I can tell you it's not a good idea to legalize marijuana. It just affects all kinds of things. So I flip-flopped on this myself, but that's the argument. That really is the argument. Is it worth, and obviously, a great example when we know it didn't work was prohibition. I would argue as a Catholic that was an unjust law because, people have a right to enjoy
alcohol.
All
right. So tell me why outlawing marijuana is the right thing to do.
Because unlike alcohol that can be used in moderation, I don't think marijuana can be used non-medicinal. There's medicinal uses of marijuana, which I support, but they come with a prescription. The recreational use of marijuana can't be done in moderation. So my point is that this is why I think it's immoral to use marijuana, except for medicinal purposes. A person can't smoke marijuana, at least the marijuana that now exists, which is much stronger than just the straight plant, and operate a vehicle safely, come back to work and operate machinery safely. They have incapacitated themselves. We would say
you can have like one beer and drive, but you can't have one joint and drive.
Right. That's my point. That there's no moderate use of it.
Interesting. Now, this sounded like personal for you because like you've seen something. Is that as a pastor?
Well, yeah,
I've
been recently to places that have decriminalized it, and I've seen the effects. I was in New York City, for example, this summer, and the amount of homeless and others around the dispensary shops. Now, they're obviously using more than just marijuana, but why are they around the dispensary shops? Because that's where they got their start, and that's what they use as part of their drug routine. And the human effects are devastating to behold. I'm in a city that's got a border going through it, and Missouri has decriminalized a lot, and Kansas haven't. So we've seen a little bit even in my city of Kansas City.
Yeah. Well, these CBD shops, which I don't understand at all, but they are everywhere.
I don't know North Carolina.
Right? I mean, every corner. And I don't know how much weed they actually get in there versus just some other variant.
Well, I knew something was wrong when they designated them as essential and churches weren't during the pandemic shutdown. Something's amiss here. So
yeah,
but you're right about the use of just war theory because actually just war theory. How did Augustine and Ambrose? How did Basil? How did they build up just war theory? They started with the domestic analogy. My house is being invaded. What am I allowed to do to defend my family? What must I do to defend my family? What that's how they started thinking about it. And then they actually went from the micro to the macro to come up with the just war theory. It starts when I teach this, especially when I teach it at secular places, I start with the macro example. The micro examples. I don't start with wars and insurrections. I start with, someone. Well, actually, in a lot of the textbooks, we now start with cases where someone we're picnicking and someone is driving at us with a truck to run us over. What can we do to stop the truck? Right. Illegally and morally, and then we put, So there's a lot of variations off that classic example of self and other defense. Yeah. So just war theory really is a building up of the domestic analogy.
Tan Books is here to help you become a saint. That's why we do everything we do. We publish thousands of titles, literally, that are specifically written to help you get to heaven. Everything from the lives of the saints to the writings of the saints, the greatest doctors of the church, the great spiritual masters, Alphonsus Liguori, St. Francis de Sales, and so on. So please come to tanbooks.com and find the book that God wants you to have right now so that you can get to heaven and be a saint for eternity.
I don't know how to broach this, but in the church, it's always been contentious, but there's a lot of tension right now. I'd say in the last 15 years, more than in the previous 15 years, between different segments of the church, particularly with the younger clergy and laity, with their local bishops, and people are trying to figure out what is the proper way for, let's say, lay people. Let's leave the clergy out of it. Like lay people to challenge their bishops or to challenge like church authority. They're trying to figure out the morally proper way to do that, because you kind of, in a sense, you're like, well, do you lack legitimate authority? What is proportionality? What's your probability of success? Yeah. I mean, like if you don't like your bishop, or you don't like a cardinal, or you don't like a pope, or whatever it may be, or you don't like your pastor, you just don't like your pastor. I guess in the Middle Ages you were just kind of like stuck with it, but now there's means to do things,
Well, there are. I think this is where the just warrior analogy breaks down completely, because it's not a conflict in that sense. It's not your home being invaded.
Right.
It's just legitimate disagreements, legitimate or otherwise, between people inside the same family, right? We're part of the same family. And we're all baptized people are members of the same family. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is our last name. That's how we write our last name. We're all part of that one family. We're sons and daughters in the Son. Now, Jesus taught us where 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, that he will be present. And it's beautiful. We call upon the Lord's presence. Here now, we call upon the Lord's presence in this conversation, that we may radiate his presence in word and sacrament. All those we serve, I like to say that in my prayer before Mass. Jesus said, where 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, he'll be present. We're part of that. Aristotle, who was a very wise man, didn't have the grace of knowing the gospel, or even perhaps the Old Covenant, though there's debate about that. But he was a very wise man, and every human person is living with the outpouring of grace from God. Aristotle was able to discern that we're political animals. So where 2 or 3 are gathered, there'll be politics.
Yeah.
And those who want to do away with politics want to do away with humanity.
Good luck,
because that's the human condition. We're political animals.
Well,
for good.
Chesterton said the idea that you can't speak about religion or politics is crazy, because that's all there is in life, because religion is your relationship with God and politics is your relationship with man. Right. There's nothing else to talk about.
Exactly. And so, we're political animals, and there'll be politics, which means there are going to be legitimate or illegitimate differences and conflicts. Now, as a pastor, I have to admit, where 2 or 3 are gathered in Jesus' name, there should be a collection. So that's just, got to take advantage of that. But joking aside, my point for bringing all this up is, of course, there's politics in the church, because we're political animals.
Yeah.
There's going to be disagreements. I have been through the liturgical wars since I became Catholic. I became Catholic in the early 80s. We were just coming out of the post-Vatican II liturgical wars. And some terrible things were done in those liturgical wars. Lots of people were driven away from the faith because the church didn't, especially the United States, didn't handle the sensitivities that people had to liturgical traditions that they'd grown up with churches they helped build. Their grandparents and parents had sacrificed when they didn't have a lot to create beautiful things. And you know better than I, as someone who's a born Catholic, a lot of places had what I call recovations, where they in the name of renovation racked beautiful, ancient, churches and sanctuaries. So the liturgical wars can cut right to the core because they cut right to the intimacy of prayer.
And you feel like it's a war.
Yeah.
Like lay people sometimes feel like war has been waged upon us.
Yeah. So I get it. Especially when it's something that touches on the intimate. That's why I say people are sensitive to what goes on in their church because this is their intimate relationship with God.
Yes.
And it's like, it is equivalent to a family's bedroom, and we have to recognize that, we priests especially. That's why I'm very hesitant as a pastor to ever impose my own wants on these things. Now, there's certain liturgical laws that need to be followed, and if a place is breaking those, a priest has to, if he's following canon law, enforce liturgical norms, which are bound. Liturgical law is also part of canon law. Canon law says that liturgical law has the weight of law, so it ought to be. And the people of God deserve Mass said as the church intended the Mass to be said. They deserve fully the teaching of the church, whole and entire, right? And it's not right for a priest to impose his own teaching and his own liturgical whims that violate or disagree with the teachings of the church or liturgical norms. So people of God have that right. And canon law says the people of God, if those rights are being violated, have a right to appeal to their superiors. They have a right and duty to do fraternal correction. They have the right and duty to let the person know that, hey, you're stepping on our rights here. Yeah. And that's part of what canon law empowers the people of God to do, is to speak up and to, make known their legitimate grievances. Yeah. Now, of course, there is human wisdom. Don't sweat the small things, and a lot more are small things. Yeah. If the priest says his oramus and his hands aren't exactly where you think they should be, oh well, right. That's not worth going to war over. But if he's changing the words of the Eucharistic prayer to the point that you think you might not have a valid mass, you have something to be said. Jermaine Grisey, who was one of my mentors, infamously stood up in Greenwich Village once when he was at a mass in New York, when he was at a conference, and in the middle of mass, told the priest, "Read the words in the book." And I asked him about that, and he said, I wanted to be at a valid mass, and he was close to invalidating the mass, so I wanted to stop him before he did. Awesome. So, so I mean, so this is how it goes. Now,
I love that.
Now, there are real differences. One size fits few. There are real differences that aren't law but taste. Yeah. What kind of vestments I wear is somewhat a matter of taste and style and the tradition of the place I'm at. So I'm in an African-American parish. So a lot of my vestments that the church has, it matches the altar cloths of the parish too, have an African style to them. Yeah. That would be totally inappropriate in a non-African-American parish. But at my parish, they make perfect sense.
All right. Tell me more about, what is it like to be, because you're pretty white. I don't know what else to call it.
I have a friend who says I'm the whitest person he knows. So
sorry. Yeah. I don't know what else to say. Yeah. But what's it like to be the pastor of a black parish? It's got to be, when you were appointed this, where you're like, what's this going to be like? It must be a little different than other assignments.
By the grace of God, and it's been a real privilege. It's the second time I've had an African-American parish. So when I was a very young priest and chaplain at Bradley University, my bishop asked me to be pastor of what was then St. Martin de Porres Parish in Peoria. So it was my first experience of a predominantly African-American parish. The second here is Our Lady in St. Rose in Kansas City, Kansas, when Archbishop Naumann asked me to take it on in addition to the college. So we're small, but we're the African-American parish for the Kansas City, Kansas, and about 80% of my parishioners are African-American. And we have a gospel choir, so it's every mass got that gospel flair, which I find very stirring. I cannot sing well, so they had to put up with the fact their pastor can't belt them out like they can and do well. Like I said, there are certain aspects of our liturgical vestments and other things that would reflect that African heritage, African-American heritage.
Do you have to bend the rubrics to make that work?
Not at all.
Okay.
And I won't. I mean, it's just, and again, I don't think it's what the people of God deserve. They deserve the church.
So it fits in there.
Right.
It fits within.
Enculturization is what St. John Paul II talked about.
Yeah,
we enculturate the gospel. We enculturate the liturgical inside the norms of liturgical law. So, and some of this is regional. I had priests, when I was at the University of Illinois, I gave scholarships to priests in Tanzania to finish their doctorate at the university as long as they'd help out at the Newman Center because we had so many Catholics we needed the help. And, we discussed a lot the differences between saying Mass in Tanzania and saying Mass in the United States, partly because they had to get used to saying Mass in the United States.
Yeah.
Now, one thing, in most of the parts of Tanzania, people come long distances, often by foot.
Yes.
So they expect Mass to be much longer and to it being a kind of a holistic experience of a day, if you will, most of the day. So they'll preach longer and they'll teach longer. And there'll be other aspects. And in many parts of Tanzania, from what I understand from these priests, aspects of African dance are enculturated into the Mass. So, for example, when they process the gospel, it might be like
a liturgical dance kind of thing. Yeah.
And the same thing with bringing up the gifts.
Yes.
Now, that'd be totally inappropriate in most settings in the United States, and most places in the United States would be actually outlawed by liturgical law as inappropriate, but it makes sense in the Tanzanian situation.
Well, one little footnote here. So I've been in Jamaica with Father Holong and the Missionaries of the Poor, and in their Mass there, the townspeople literally bring baskets full of fruits and vegetables that they grew on their land, and they bring it, and that's all offered up in front of the altar, and the altar's just like filled with all of these offerings. I mean, talk about an offering as opposed to our little basket of money.
Right. That's
how it's a beautiful thing. And so this is like this huge procession. Everyone's coming up, and it's kind of like that does not fit at St. Michael's across the street here. But when you see this, it's like, this is incredible. It's beautiful, in a very Jamaican way.
Right. Well, that's the way it was in the early church, from my understanding. Now, I'm not a liturgist, and I don't play one on the radio or television, so I'm a moral theologian. But liturgists tell me that in the early church, the gifts included bringing up food for the poor and all of that. And one of the reasons, actually, the priest washes his hands is because he was receiving all of those things.
Interesting. Wow.
And so now it became having other meanings liturgically.
Yeah.
And when I wash my hands now, we pray for the forgiveness of sins. But, wash away my iniquities, cleanse me of my sins.
But there is usually a literal origin of things that take on more of an allegorical meaning later on. You know?
So in the early church, that's how the poor were taken care of. People brought that, and that's part of the offertory. So,
wow, that's cool.
But the what other differences would you find in an African American setting? I tend to preach a little bit more like the African American preaching experience would be. So I don't stay at the pulpit normally. I usually am, and you're allowed to do this in the church's rubric, preach away from the pulpit. Though I'm experimenting going shorter again. But when I first got there, it was made very clear that they wanted longer homilies because that was what they were used to, and that's good. I mean, that's that tradition, and therefore I can be more didactic than you might be able in a suburban parish, where I joke you have to make sure everybody gets out on time, and Mass should end not with "Go in peace." It should end with "Gentlemen, start your engines."
Right.
Everyone's rushing for the part, but at our church they don't rush. As a matter of fact, there's a great gathering afterwards. People stay and talk, and announcements can go on for 20 minutes or longer, because in the African American history, the church is all they had that they owned and completely were free. Even when they were enslaved, they had some freedom in the church. So social communication happens even with the modern means of social communication. They still want to hear it, and they'll have announcements. So people come up, and it's kind of an open thing where people can come up and make announcements. That's done regularly in my church.
See, that's incredible to see. Even to this day, you have this kind of lineage going back to enslavement times, where this was their area. This is where they could communicate. This was their means of communication. And
the church was everything, and
church was everything.
That's healthier than the way we treat our suburban churches as just places where the sacraments are dispensed, rather than places where we really come and have communion. Communion.
What's the culture like outside the church? I mean, you have, I guess these are your parishioners. you've gotten an insight, I guess, into the African American community and culture more than a lot of priests do. What's that experience been like?
Well, of course, partly because of the history for African American Catholics, but partly because of the ongoing struggles in many African American communities. A lot more of my parishioners have suffered directly or indirectly the scourge of violence. So there are several families in my family, in my family of families, which is my parish, that have lost someone to gun violence.
Yeah, wow.
There are a disproportionate number of my families have someone in their family incarcerated because we disproportionately incarcerate African Americans. We particularly are suffering in my parish because within my parish boundaries there was a corrupt policeman who was put on trial. He committed suicide before the trial ended, so they never got to the fact was he guilty or not. But it looks like he blackmailed people into doing favors for him, sexual and otherwise, by threatening to incarcerate their children. And that families in my parish have people that have been unjustly incarcerated. Now some of them released, some not. So there are real injustices that they're dealing with. So the gospel, when it talks about letting those yoked go free, let those imprisoned, hear the good news. Yeah. And my college, we do the associate degree in the prison system in Kansas, so we're going into the prisons. But so there's things that you just don't think about affecting the people that affect my parishioners. And obviously, my parishioners, many of them have done quite well for themselves. They're very, very well, but others have not. The socioeconomic reality is the African American families and communities are still behind everybody else in the United States. So there's still that kind of economic struggles too. But my people are very generous, and they're always looking how to help the poor, much more, quite frankly, readily and hands-on than what you would see in many suburban parishes.
So do the same doctrinal issues, the hot button issues that your typical, upper middle class, white, conservative, traditional parish, that we sit around and talk about, the hot topic issues, does that predominate in their culture as well, or is it different? Like what you're implying is like they're dealing with suffering in a way that we don't deal with suffering. So does that mean that the doctrinal issues kind of are a little different for them? Well,
unfortunately, the merger of politics and religion in the African American community has the same issues that it does in the rest of the United States. But just the history is different, a little bit different. So most African Americans at one stage were Republican. It was the party of Lincoln that freed them, as they look at the history. And obviously, the Democratic Party was tainted with the Jim Crow of the South, and so it was more than likely that an African American, especially African American in a place like Kansas, which was a free state, were going to be Republican. That basically ended when Nixon's Southern strategy flipped the scorecard, and many of the Jim Crow politicians switched parties and became Republicans. In the Carolinas, I can talk about people like Strom Thurmond. Many African Americans, though while some still in Kansas are Republican, the vast majority switched parties. Now what happened? Well, the pressure there for people to conform to the political party they're part of and not to church teaching on social issues happens no matter if you're white, Asian, African American, Latino, whatever. And so now we have many African American Catholics are Democrats, and the party has abandoned its roots. It's abandoned the defense of the innocent, especially the unborn. It's now abandoning the elderly and the sick, as we see in Illinois and New York, signing in gross laws to allow mercy, what they call mercy killing, but it's just killing. Mm-hmm. They've now decided the sick are, too much for them. They might as well kill them. So this is a real tension, though, because unfortunately, that's where I grew up in Pennsylvania, where Bob Casey was a Democrat governor, but he was pro-life, and anti-mercy killing because he knew it was killing. But those days seem to be long gone. So we have the same tensions that everybody has, where they're tempted to conform to their party and not to the gospel. Republicans have the same issues, but it's different locations. Republicans are compromising the gospel in several areas, and you have to have that where you stand up for the gospel, not and try to reform the party you belong to.
What about, we were talking about in the car a little bit about how the Catholic Church treated the black community throughout history, and how, you gave me some things I had never considered, because I guess I don't know what I guess I'd never really questioned how the Catholic Church treated the black population in this country, but the idea of how, the Catholic Church was maybe better and maybe a little ahead of the curve than the secular world, we did not do as well as people might think.
Right. Yeah, we have our own racial history that was problematic. The norm in most places was you had separate churches for blacks and whites. Even the fact that I can talk about an African American parish says
the history. Shows the history.
And the way my parish is, it has parish boundaries, but it's specifically in its charter the African American parish for the city of Kansas City in Kansas. And that happened. So there was many places, Louisiana famously, the town would have a black church and a white church. Here in the Carolinas, I've been to Georgetown, for example, down in South Carolina. My parents retired to Myrtle's Inlet, just above it. They historically had two churches that way, that one was black, one was for the whites. So we had separate but equal.
But that alone there, that's not necessarily a sign of racism.
No,
because
not at all.
That's just like where the neighborhood that it's in.
Right. Well, and to some extent, that's the way it was handled in many places. Now, inevitably, unfortunately, the black church had less resources, and usually was, not given the resources
by the diocese
in the proportion. But leave that aside. But what happened when we combined the parishes is we almost inevitably shut the black parish.
I see.
Now, again, you think about what we talked about post-Vatican II, where your beloved church may not be as beautiful as the one across town, may not be as wealthy, but my forebears worshipped here and sacrificed, and that altar is from there, that window's from there.
Interesting.
You close it. Best intentions, right? Integrate the church. But the result was often we lost Catholics to black Catholics.
We'll bring the churches together, but you come to ours.
Right.
Which means you get a longer commute.
Right. And also you're asking me
you lose your tradition there.
Right. Now you're asking me to pray with people which a few months ago weren't willing to allow me to come into the church. Because in a lot of these places, segregation, held reign.
Wow, yeah.
So now what I was talking to you about in the car was I preached on some history that I experienced with African American parish history. And I talked about some of the prejudice. And my parishioners who are older came and told me stories that they were in quote unquote white churches, and growing up back in the old days, the altar rail, they had to wait till all the whites went to communion before they could go to communion.
Now that's a shocker.
Yeah.
That blows my mind. Like I don't find it hard to believe there are black and white churches, because there's black and white neighborhoods.
Right.
And I don't even have, it's not even a huge shocker to me that you're gonna merge these together. You're gonna close one down. So you probably pick the biggest one, the nicest one, the richest one to stay open, and you close the poorer one. Like there's some logic there.
Right.
But was it really the policy in a Catholic church that black people would wait for the white people to receive communion?
At one time, sadly.
Oh my God. See, that's...
Yeah. And I joke about this because
that infuriates me.
Well, in some places also the black back pews or the balcony was reserved for blacks. And of course,
segregation built into the architecture.
Right. So I kind of kid that. I said nowadays, of course, the back pews are fought over. Though you come early, get the back pew. You can tell a Catholic, in a setting they always look for the back pew. But joking aside, and this is in the lifetime of my older parishioners. Now I'm 66. And I'm talking about people older than I, so they're remembering often pre-Vatican II days.
You're looking good.
Yeah. Well, thanks. You can fool some of the people some of the time, but we have to be honest that there was real prejudice, and remember, I have up on my altar, side altars, I have the pictures of the 6 African Americans who have reached the level of servant of God or above, venerable servant of God. They're on their way to canonization. And Father Tobin is one of them, the first African American to be ordained a priest in the United States. There was a time when African Americans could not be priests in the United States.
Really?
Yeah.
See,
So,
I never even,
yeah.
I never even asked the question.
Yeah.
That never dawned on me.
Yeah. There's a movie coming out actually of his
Really?
life. Yeah. He was born a slave.
How did the church explain that one?
Well, it's the way it was. Well, Martin de Porres, for example, couldn't become a priest.
So he was just a late,
because
he was just a
mulatto.
brother.
He was a brother,
brother.
right. Because he was of mixed origin, and they had that kind of prejudice.
Oh, I should have known that.
Yeah. Now, beautiful thing about my church is named Our Lady and St. Rose of Lima. St. Rose of Lima and Martin de Porres were dear friends.
Yes.
And so we have a statue of Martin de Porres in the window for St. Rose. But, in Lima at that time, there was only about 6,000 people living in Lima at the time, but there's 6 canonized saints from that time. So I tell people,
That's a hell of a ratio.
well, I tell people that must be the ratio God really wants. So that every town should say for every 1,000 people, we're going to have one saint, for every generation.
That's
That's actually, we're all called to be saints. So it should be 100%, but that's another story for another day. But, we got to reckon with that history. Now, interestingly enough, even though officially, up until Tobin, there wasn't an African-American priest, and he had actually be trained in Rome because no American seminary would take him. But the 2 Healy brothers, one became the first bishop of Maine, Portland, Maine, and the other became the president of Georgetown University. They were from Georgia. Their father was a white plantation owner. Their mother was an African American. I think she was enslaved. I can't for sure say that because I don't know the history well enough. But they passed as quote unquote white and went on to be successful clerics in early American church. But they were technically under our law African Americans, but they were never recognized as African American. They deliberately, didn't ever identify themselves as having a mother who was at least partially African American.
Wow.
So, yeah. So there's interesting history in these things in the United States. Race is always tied into everything in American history. We can't separate it because it's the reality of our founding.
If I wanted to research
Mm-hmm.
the church's official position on whether a black guy could get ordained to the priesthood,
Mm-hmm.
how would I research that? I mean, what was the
yeah,
was there
there's
a
de
canon
facto.
law?
It's de facto and de jure.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. So it was never de jure, but it was de facto.
Right, exactly. That's why he could be trained in Rome, because Rome was, obviously training people from Africa and all kind of places, but he couldn't be trained here in the States.
So if a black guy here wanted to, he probably had to get a ticket over to Europe somehow.
So, Tolan. I said Tobin. It's Tolan, by the way. His mom snuck across the river from Hannibal, Missouri, to Quincy, Illinois. So they became free by getting to Quincy right at the time of the Civil War. He was brought up in Quincy, and the priests there, to their credit, the priests there, some of them who were foreign-born Irish, who came to America as missionaries, they recognized his brilliance. They recognized his piety. They recognized he probably was called to the priesthood. So they encouraged him to become a priest. He was sent to Rome, and with the understanding he'd probably become a missionary to Africa because he couldn't come back to the States to be a priest. But the authorities in Rome at the time, along with some bishops in America, insisted on him coming back because they wanted to break the color barrier. And he did. He was served in Quincy for a while, ended up in Chicago, where he famously spent his energy in his life forming a black parish, and it took off like wildfire. But he died very young in his 40s of exhaustion and worn out. But hopefully he'll get canonized.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
What a great story.
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah.
And I know a publisher that publishes books about saints. So.
There's some good. And this one, Ignatius beat you to the punch.
Oh, too bad.
There's a good book by Ignatius, and I
awesome.
can't think of his title off the top of my head, but yeah.
Well, last question.
Sure.
You've had this remarkable life so far. I don't want to call it career, but vocation. But what's you're 66. What's in store for Monsignor Stuart Swetland next? What do you want to be the next? The next half of your priesthood.
Well, I tell my students and my staff sometimes I don't believe in bumper stickers. I was taught by a priest. He who lives by slogans is dead to the truth. It took me about 20 years to figure out, wait a minute, that's a slogan. But no, in fact, many of our truths boil down to slogans, and it's good. We say Jesus Christ is true God and true man. That's a slogan, but it is a profound truth that can be meditated upon, night and day. So I tell them if I did have a bumper sticker, though, it would read, "Be patient with me. God isn't through yet." I think God has some things to do with me. One of the things he wants me to quit resisting his grace and become the saint I'm called to be. I'm far from it. And I'm looking forward to allowing God's grace to better penetrate and possess, to heal, to elevate, to forgive, and allow me to become the saint I'm called to be, because none of us are going to get to heaven until we're the perfected lovers we're called to be. One of the things that makes heaven heavenly, Conor, is that everybody there is perfected. And one of the most merciful teachings we have in the Catholic Church, we understand that we may die not yet perfected. And so there's that finishing school of love in the sky we call purgatory that gives us time to become the saints. Well, I shouldn't wait till then to become the saint I'm called to be. I'm hoping for heaven, and I'm relying on the grace of God, and I really want him to take control and to transform me. I think he wants me to continue to be where I'm at. Of course, I'm under obedience to bishops, so this is out of my hands. And I hope I can continue what I try to do and have my college do and have my parish do, is we want to radiate Jesus Christ in word and sacrament to the communities we serve. And so that's what the church needs to be doing right now. It's not about going left. It's not about going right. It's about going deeper into the mystery of God's love for us and radiating that, because the world is looking for peace. It's looking for joy. It's looking for Christ. It just doesn't know it. We have to be more efficacious in radiating Christ's presence. That's what I hope to do in the years I've got left.
I don't know how you can end better than that. Thank you, Monsignor, for being here. It's been an honor sitting here with you, and maybe we can do it again sometime.
Well, bless you and this apostolate you're doing, not only obviously with this podcast, but the wonderful things you do with TAM Books. Thank you. And your family, of course, halfway there.
Yeah, we're very blessed. I keep looking around and saying, why in the world has God given me all these good things? To whom much is given, much is expected, and that scares the crap out of me.
Luke 12:48. I grew up with parents who quoted that frequently to us children, and I'm grateful they did.
God bless you, Father.
Thank you. God
Monsignor,
bless you.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks guys for checking out the Conor Gallagher Show. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, or comment, or whatever you got to do to support it. And I appreciate that very much.